I'm gonna do something that I seen all of the other I saw two streamers doing this. They're reacting to the lore arc by Saint One. So I finally realized, and I'm doing this to watch this, and I'm also excited that it's 2 hours.
In of beginnings was the Ark, an all-powerful relic which transcended the planes of reality. In the raw, chaotic state of existence of this dimension stood Zosma, the god of chaos. Then would appear Regulus, the god of order, who became the one to control the Ark's power and used it to manifest order within his newly established cosmos. He fabricated the very universe our world situated itself within with this power, calling it Omnium, and from there would go on to dot the galaxies with many worlds. But only one would foster the creation of life, and this was the very world we inhabit today, Arcacia. The creation of life was not without its consequences, however. By creating the very concept of life, Regulus had also birthed the concept of death as well, an equivalent not so dissimilar to his countenance to Zosma. This is a novel idea to keep within your mind as you listen to this tale. Light and darkness, order and chaos, life and death, good and evil. These are the radical categories that are not mutually exclusive. It's an important theme that the story of Lost Ark guides itself along. Arcacia was populated with life through the efforts of Regulus's godly creations. Regulus would take the Ark and split it into 7 fragments, each held by a god of his own creation. The god of honor, Procyon, who was seated closest to Regulus himself, would create the Lazaneth. The winged race were created in the image of the supreme god of order himself, and were blessed with the gift of flight, tasked with overseeing the events of the world from the skies. The goddess of wisdom, Skeptrum, would create the long-eared Sylvain. Graceful in appearance and tempered in worldview, the elven race were particularly gifted in wielding sorcery and magics. The god of fire, Antares, created the Hal. Cunning and resourceful, masters of strategies and the most fearsome in battle. The Hal were often considered the mightiest of the mortal races, both in combat strength as well as technologically. The god of life, Aldebaran, populated the world with creatures and spirits. This provided bountiful food and protection for the other races. The god of earth, Arcturus, created the Umar and the giants. The dwarven masters of the forge would rapidly push forward the industrial progression of the world, constructing tall castle walls and tempering powerful weapons. The goddess of life, Gienna, would be the one who filled the seas of Arcacia and would also create the Posita to dwell within them. Gienna would also create the Nia, a tribe whose chieftain would adopt the very same name, as well as the Yaz, an isolated race isolated in the southeast Remeria Isles. Secluded and xenophobic, the Yaz guard their own secrets and hold the ability to commune with all life on the planet. They are split between North and South Remeria. All Yaz bear features of a specific animal on birth that they carry throughout their lives. Those who were born in South Remeria are often smaller in stature, taking after critters such as rabbits, squirrels, and foxes. Those born in the north, on the other hand, often would take after larger animals such as deer or tigers. The god of ice, Sirius, would create the Tabr, a race indigenous to the cold landscapes to the far north. Gienna would also create hand-in-hand with Sirius the race of humans. Cursed with no particularly redeeming features or powers, humanity would prove to be the most adaptable and versatile of the many inhabitants of the planet. Though despite the many races that lived on Arcacia, only 3 truly were blessed with God's favor. The Lazaneth, the Sylvain, and the Hal would ultimately be the 3 creations which would mainly rule the Star of Life. Each wielded immense power or knowledge that the other races did not have. While each of the 3 were individually powerful, this also served to keep one another in check, until one fateful day. History wrote that the Hal, the cunning race created by Antares, deceived the god of fire and relinquished his piece of the Ark from him. With this power, the Hal threatened the very balance of powers of the world. forcing the Lazaneth and the Sylvain to take action. However, despite their best efforts, their combined strength would not be enough to overcome the Hal. This forced the hand of the Lazaneth, who in a desperate maneuver infiltrated the realm of the gods and stole the power of the Ark that belonged to their creator, Procyon. With this, they were able to stop the Hal's advance and put an end to their campaign to dominate Arcacia. But the events of this turmoil did not go unnoticed. Regulus, who witnessed what had transpired, was outraged by his creations and their offspring. Firstly, he punished the Hal, who had deceived their own god, by sentencing them to genocide. He would have the Hal eradicated from all of existence for their treachery. To Antares, Regulus's own creation, who had been fooled by the race that he had given life to, he was expelled from the domain of the gods, stripped of his name and godhood. His fate remains unknown. To the Lazaneth, the race whom Regulus favored most, he crippled their wings so they may never experience the joy of flight again, but would have them keep their wings as a reminder of their sin. He also imprisoned them in the floating isles of Algacia, never to leave. To Procyon, who allowed his fragment of the Ark to be stolen, he would strip the god of language, sentencing him to eternal silence. Finally, to prevent this from ever happening again, he forbade any of the gods from interfering with mortal affairs, moving forward, locking them away in a faraway realm. This turmoil would also have an unintended side effect on Omnium itself. Whereas Arcacia existed within
The visuals are so nice.
Omnium, there exists another plane where darkness and chaos resides. This place is the home of Petrania, the dark star which Zazma governed. Petrania was a lawless land that bred pure chaos. It was the very antithesis to the order that Regulus hoped to create with Arcacia. However, Zazma, who coveted the power of the Ark, yearned for something as everlasting as primal light. When the battle between the races of Arcacia reached its climax, a rift formed between the dimensions, creating a bridge that allowed Zazma and his army to invade in search of the fragments of the Ark. This led to a devastating conflict between the mortal races, the gods, and the creatures of Petrania over who would seize the Ark. There were irreversible consequences from this unnamed war, such as Sirius annihilating the lush and prosperous Shushire, covering it with a permanent frost that would never melt, also that Zazma's forces would be stopped in their tracks. The ends to justify the means. The fighting escalated further and further, creating more and more instability in Omnium, which was beginning to pull Petrania into its fold. Had the war continued, there lived a very real threat of the planets crashing into one another and Omnium itself collapsing. Zazma, the first to notice the catastrophe ensuing, called for a truce with his counterpart Regulus. The latter agreed, and the two gods would use the Ark to create the Guardians. These powerful creatures, composed of order and chaos within each of their bodies, had the power to restore the cracks that were forming in Omnium, restoring the world and the universe as a whole to a stable state. Zazma, aware of the repercussions of his actions, retreated back into the rift, back to the Star of Darkness. With the world peaceful, the Guardians, whose sole purpose was to keep the Star of Life, Arcacia, safe, would enter a deep slumber. They would only awaken again if they felt the world was in jeopardy once more. At the same time, when Petrania had nearly pulled into Omnium, another anomaly occurred. As the dimensions were starting to fuse into one another, it created a separate plane of existence called the Abyss. Here, the souls of those deceased traveled to lay to rest, which made it into an underworld for the departed. As Zazma returned to Petrania, he found that a new rift had formed that led to the Abyss. From its depths rose a new being that called himself Kazaros. Kazaros sought to usurp power from Zazma, who had already been weakened after the war with Regulus, and rapidly established order within Petrania. Zazma's power derived from the essence of chaos, and so this very act would further weaken him. Aware of the danger that Kazaros presented, Zazma sought to use the power of primal darkness to forcibly turn those who had been led towards order back to chaos. However, as he confronted Kazaros, Zazma would be betrayed by the very ones who existed from the beginning beside him, as his closest advisors would side with Kazaros in this battle. A weakened Zazma was swiftly defeated by Kazaros and his former allies. Few would notice, however, as the defeated god fell, splinters of his very being would fly off towards Blackrock Mountain and the Abyss, respectively. It would be an agent of chaos known by the moniker Kakul Sedon that would mask his escape. Despite turning traitor and allying himself with Kazaros, Kakul was still the catalyst that would allow Zazma to continue existing. His motives remain unknown even to this day. Kazaros, having deposed the former ruler of Petrania, would begin to build up his army. His intent was clear. He too sought the power of the Ark. Those that would not rally beneath his rule would be eliminated, and he would cultivate a new race to inhabit Petrania called demons that would be completely subservient to his rule. This would be a race whose source of strength was the horns adorned on their body. In order to obtain the Ark, though, Khosrows had no choice but to wait for an opportunity to cross into Omnium. The same strategy that Zazma had. To this end, a sorceress named the Witch of Chaos, also known as the Last Survivor, had a prophecy that she passed on to Khosrows. When the light of the red moon has waned, the dimensions will be warped. The red moon, an artificial sun created by the gods of darkness, those that once served Zazma that now swore their allegiance to Khosrows, granted the demons great strength when basked in its moonlight. However, unlike the sun, the red moon was finite and would one day extinguish its light. And when that moment happened, the time to cross into Omnium would finally come. During this time, Khosrows would build a mighty army, to which he would bequeath the primal powers to each of his presiding generals. The Phantom Legion, led by the Ice Witch Belshazzar, would represent
Ice
Primal
Witch?
Nightmare. Among the commanders, she was the most intelligent
know.
and cunning. The Plague Legion, led by the
Jamie.
Lord of Death,
Hell yeah.
Akan. Akan once ruled over another region of Petrania known as Carthion, where his devilish scythe, Atrox, would drain the life of all those who stepped
He's
within
an
its ward.
Aatrox?
He would yield to the more powerful Khosrows and obtain the powers
He said
of primal
Aatrox!
disease. The Beast Legion,
Like he
led
meant
by the mighty
Akan.
Vultan, within the Blackrock Mountains of Petrania, was a never-ending war between ferocious beasts. The one who stood at the apex was Vultan, a behemoth of a minotaur who wore the skull of his rival Drakal on his shoulder. The Covetous Legion was originally led by the beautiful temptress Echidna. However, Echidna herself would come to desire being seated closest to Khosrows among the commanders,
Hell
and
yeah.
sent her minion Vicus to
Oh my
assassinate
god. Oh, her
Belshazzar.
minion. Oh,
However,
wow.
Vicus would be tempted
Just
herself
okay.
by the promise of power and betrayed Echidna, siding with Belshazzar and turning the ploy against her former master. With the vacancy of the commander of the Covetous Legion open, Belshazzar recommended Vicus to the post. The Covetous Legion represented the power of primal
Bless.
desire. Next
What's
to the
cooking?
sinister Kakul
Me
Sedon, one of the
currently in this
primordial
room is so
beings
hot.
that betrayed
I love
Zazma
it.
and in secret had also helped Zazma's soul splinters escape, went to Khosrows demanding to be one of the top
You trying
commanders.
to carry me and Thamar
Khosrows
normal?
initially
What's
rejected
up?
this request, but eventually gave in to Kakul's persistent annoyances, granting him command of the Mayhem Legion. Kakul's army would be the weakest one, but also the largest. They represented primal madness. Lastly, there was one more commander in Khosrows' army, an extremely powerful being who had conquered half of Petrania on his own, known only as Thamine. Khosrows, along with
Thamine.
Belshazzar, appeared before him, granting him the power of primal darkness. This act also imparted the curse of oblivion onto Thamine, stripping him of his memories and forcing him to become subservient to Khosrows as his most powerful warrior. With his army ever growing, Khosrows patiently awaited the day
That's
of the red
crazy.
moon's dying light. Returning to Arcacia, the world was at peace after the first recorded war between Regulus and Zazma.
I didn't know Khosrows was
Vahal
like
had
that
disappeared, with
powerful.
the only evidence
Even
that
though I
they
watched
ever
all the
existed in the
cutscenes.
first place being ruins of their past civilization found in
Like,
Punica,
more
where the
powerful
Nia
than
tribe
Thamine?
resides, as well as in Curzon,
I thought he would be,
which
like,
at this time was
parallel.
uninhabited. Over the next 500 years, humanity continued to progress very quickly, establishing
I
the
watched one of
Church
his
of
lore
Sapphira,
videos back when
an
I started
order
playing
which
it, but I haven't
directly
watched any more
worshipped
since. I didn't even
Regulus
know there was more. I was
themselves.
trying to look for a playlist.
This order was
thought this
led
was the
by
only
Archon
one.
Thermer II,
It's over now.
one
I'm
of
just
the
gonna be
few who
watching
even
this.
still remembered the existence of the Ark. The Ark's fragments remained in Arcacia even despite the absence of the gods. However, as hundreds of years passed since the previous conflicts over them, many of those who were still alive had forgotten about the Ark. Archon Thermer II would secretly send his agents to investigate potential leads related to the location of the scattered Ark fragments. It would later be known that Sacria was
Hey,
a
am I normal?
divisive
I can
order
help, but I
with
don't
two
have anyone else
prominent
to fill the
factions
lobby.
within the
If
Holy
you could
State.
just join the lobby.
They were known as
for a
the
little
Dawn
bit, see if
Priests
we
and the
pull
Twilight
anyone, it would be
Priests,
cool.
respectively, with the latter of the two being a far more extremist group
I have
within
one
Sacria.
person. He can
Archon
support
Therma
or
II
DPS,
eventually
so
passed
it
of
would be
old
two of you.
age long before
But
his
no, I don't have
investigations
anyone.
would turn up
I don't.
any
He doesn't
meaningful
have
results.
this. He has
His successor and son, Archon Therma III, however,
Valdis.
later discovered his research into the Ark and continued his father's ambitions. Far more resourceful and ruthless compared to his late father, he wound up finding several leads to the fragments of the Ark. To the king of the Federation of Rethramis and the leader of the continent of Shushire, he ordered by the decree of God that the fragment of the Ark be handed over. Both complied without any conflict. Another piece of the Ark was situated at the top of Mount Curzon, an active volcano, and he would send countless of his paladins to their early demise to retrieve it. Their corpses and ashes still litter the mountainside to this day. Next, he sought out the Posita tribe, whom he knew were in grave peril due to the seas having been contaminated, threatening their very livelihoods. In exchange for their fragment, he offered a sacred relic from the holy capital Rasamoa's vaults, an artifact of divine origin called Gienna's Tears, which could cleanse away the deadly pollutants of the ocean.
Very cool.
This trade between the Posita and Sacria would largely be considered the starting point of the next major war between Arcasia's civilizations. With the Ark obtained from the Posita tribe, Sacria then sought out the great giant Domarek. The Archon had learned that within the belly of this colossal titan was another fragment of the Ark. Through planned murder, Thermer III led an army to slay Domarek and rip the fragment from his stomach. That led Thermer III to the final piece of the Ark that he was missing, and undoubtedly the most difficult one to obtain. Nested deep within the Queen's Gardens of Rohendel was the final piece of the Ark. The Sylvain were the last of the mighty three races of distant yore. The Hal were extinct and the Lazaneth were caged within Algacia, and so the strongest of Arcasia's races were the Sylvain at this point.
Looks so pretty.
Invading would do no good, but Therma III had a nefarious plan concocting. He was aware that the giants, particularly Domarek, had a friendly relation with the Sylvain. Therma III planned to disguise the passing of Domarek as one that had no relation to Sacria whatsoever. He would send ambassadors from the holy capital, delivering the heart of the dear friend of Rohendel's queen, and use that diplomatic maneuver as a way to infiltrate the Queen's Garden and steal the last fragment of the Ark. The Sacrian diplomats did manage to sneak into the Queen's Garden and abscond with the fragment. However, on their way out, they were discovered by innocent Sylvain attendants of the Queen. They chose the violent way out and killed them in cold blood to eliminate any witnesses. Despite that, they would be caught in the act by the Queen herself. She would take this as the gravest offense possible.
I didn't know
as they
Xena
had
was
not
a
only lied
queen.
about Domarek's death,
That's weird.
they also sought to steal the Ark,
That's
all while
weird.
murdering innocent Sylvain while trying to cover their trail. This event directly led to a declaration of war and began what would be known in history as the Short but Violent Hollow War. Named after the hollow fruit, a fruit indigenous to Punica and
That's
Romeria, the fruit
cute.
itself is completely empty.
How
The war was
cute.
named after it since nobody had anything to gain from it. There was nothing to conquer, there was no great prize to the victor. It was a war that was completely devoid of any meaning and only served to kill those that invited malice. The Umar, the Giants, and the Elementals would side with Rohendel. Sacria would force the Federation of Rethramis, Shushire, Gian, and Filigar to side with them. To Rethramis, they were forced by the merit of religion. To Shushire, they were goaded by the promise of another sacred relic, an undying flame that could be key to their survival in the permanently frozen landscape that they lived in.
I like the
To
fire
Filigar,
scene.
whom they had already made an exchange with for Gienna's Tears, they were already indebted to Sacria. It's not known why Gian sided with Sacria, but after the events of the upcoming war, their existence would slowly be forgotten by the people of other regions.
Takes a lot
Despite
of
the
planning.
tremendous army that Sacria amassed, upon arrival at the shores
Takes a lot of planning to make a lore like this. It was like intentional. That's so cool.
of Rohendel, they quickly met their match at the hands of Azena, Rohendel's queen. They had greatly underestimated just how powerful the Sylvain, one of the ancient races, actually were. In a desperate measure, Therma III tried to unleash the power of the Ark to turn the tides of war, but the primordial relic did not respond to his plea despite him having gathered all of the fragments. He could not understand what was missing.
Apparently, we only have about 50% of the written lore. I just mean, like, he proactively collected all of these screenshot and everything, these cutscenes and everything, and with intention to make this second part, or whatever part this is, which is cool.
With the intense war ongoing,
cool.
The turbulent world began to violently quake from all of the bloodshed. The Guardians, who had been asleep for nearly 500
The
years
newest raid
at
is about
this point,
50% of the
began to
story.
awaken.
Nice, nice.
Vergris, the progenitor of
That's
all
cool.
Guardians, swiftly flew to the capital of Sacria, Rasamoa, and incinerated the lands with fiery breath, killing Therma III and wresting the Ark from the hands of humans. The Guardians had determined at this point that the mortal races were a threat to the Star of Life. Rohendel and Sacria had no choice but to call a ceasefire to prevent their utter annihilation at the hand of the Guardians. At this point, though, the damage had been done. Unbeknownst to everyone, the cracks in the dimension began widening
I love when it has, like, the dragons, like the guardians, like as major feels.
again, just as they had 500 years prior during the unnamed war between the Hal and everyone else. The Guardians, feeling like they had accomplished their mission by stopping the war, had to make an important decision about the fate of the mortals. They could either return to slumber or annihilate them if they felt they would cause problems again in the future. Of the Guardians, only 3 had the power of free will and thought. They were Vergris, the father of all Guardians, Luen, who was relatively neutral, and Varkon, who erred towards the side of chaos. Varkon felt like in order to protect Arcacia, they must exterminate all of the mortals. Luen advocated to let them be, and ultimately Vergris would side with Luen on the matter. Before they could return to their rest, though, one of the Guardians returned with a report that one of their own had been slain. This news sent Varkon
This
into a
reminds me of Game of
seething
Thrones.
rage, and he quickly flew to the site of where one of his subordinates lay dead at the hand of a silver-haired swordsman. There,
of the
the two
Dragon.
engaged in battle, one that lasted 10 days and 10 nights without a victor. This bout would be what would push the cracks in the dimension to warp enough to form a bridge, one that the Lord of the Abyss in Petrania had long awaited. Varkon had no choice but to return to his fellow Guardians, but before he did, he would ask the name of the swordsman, who would return in kind.
I love all of the
Kadan.
Kaden cutscenes.
With the bridge now formed, demons began pouring out of holes in the sky, invading Arcacia's soil. At the forefront of the demons' incursion was the Darkness Legion led by Thamine, who quickly overwhelmed the tired and downtrodden mortal races who had just ended the Hollow War. The last time the world had been invaded 500 years ago, the mortal races were saved by divine intervention from their gods. However, as the beaten, worn, and defeated mortals cried to the sky for the gods to save them, they heard no response. The gods had abandoned them. In their moment of peril, it would be the Guardians who would step in and save the mortals, but not because they cared for them, rather because they recognized the demon advance as the greatest threat to the Star of Life. Vergris clashed with Khazros himself, while Varkon held Thamine at bay. But the stalemate did not last long, as the gods of darkness would enter the battlefield and manifest a new red moon in the sky, throwing the demonic army into a frenzy and greatly bolstering their strength, pushing back the Guardians into a corner. Varkon, who had witnessed the awe-inspiring power of chaos firsthand, also submitted to Khazros and betrayed his kin, bringing along the Guardians of Chaos to serve under Khazros in the world's darkest hour.
God! That's
When
crazy.
all hope seemed lost, then appeared on the battlefield a shining star. The gallant knight Lutera arrived with his party of Arcacia's strongest alongside him. The queen of Rohendel Azena, the master martial artist
Oh,
Sian,
she is
the
the
blacksmith
queen.
legend
I remember
Galator,
now.
the
She
wise
has her little
Yaz Elder
room.
Shandi, the sword of the Lazanith Nineveh, and the guardian slayer himself, Kadan. Their appearance overturned the tide of battle, pushing it back into a stalemate as they joined alongside the
This is gonna
remaining
make the game
Guardians
better
to
when I
press
play
back
it.
the empowered demons. Of the many battles that took place, The fiercest one was between Kadan and Thamine. The mightiest warriors from both sides of the war were locked in a clash that would scar the lands underneath them. Kadan, despite being the strongest of the mortals, would barely be able to fend off the vicious onslaught of Thamine's attacks. Azena dealt with the commander of the Phantom Legion,
bro.
Belshazzar. Galator squared off against the Minotaur Vultan. Nineveh handled the succubus Vicus, Shandy versus the maddening clown Kukul Sedon, and Cien against the lich Akan.
Okay, Akon this time, not
Meanwhile,
Aatrox.
Lutera,
Good to
the
know,
leader
good
of
to know.
Arcasia's last hope, would stand alongside Vergris to deal with the Lord of the Abyss himself. Despite their best efforts, however, they were still no
Khazros was
match for
that
Khazros,
strong.
which prompted Vergris to resort to their final trump card. He called for Mystic, the Ark Carrier Guardian, to retrieve the fragments of the Ark from the Guardian's nest. They would barely manage to hold off the demons long enough for the Ark to arrive and be passed into Lutera's hands. Through the power of the Ark, Lutera manages to unleash the all-powerful Primal Light, summoning powerful chains that bound Khazros down. Recognizing that he had been fully restrained by the very relic he sought to capture, Khazros split his soul from his corporal form and escaped back into the rift with his army, resulting in victory for the mortal races. This decision to seal away Khazros instead of killing him wasn't without controversy, however. His allies vehemently chastised him for not using the Ark, which they knew had limitless power, to simply destroy Khazros. But Lutera saw something that they did not. He saw beyond the current happenings of the world and made a decision that only he could have known to make. Lutera saw the cycle of history repeating itself and knew that had he destroyed Khazros, the same chaos would invite itself back into Arcasia in the future.
Right.
He needed humanity to break away from the repeating chain of events that was occurring, but he knew that he himself was powerless to do it with a mere human's lifespan. This would begin Lutera's 500-year plan, something that only he could do, and something that would take many years after his final years to accomplish. Of his allies, he had one person that supported him, the silver-haired swordsman Kadan. Everyone else reluctantly agreed to a plan that they were unaware of. The Ark dismantled after Lutera used it, splitting into 7 fragments once more. Lutera hoped that the tragic events of humanity inspired by the greed of man would not transpire again, and so he entrusted each piece of the Ark to a different sidereal to hide away. History called the band of heroes that saved Arcasia that day as the Sidereals, named after the constellations in the night sky. This was the end of the Chain War, an event that transpired 500 years after the unnamed War of the Gods and 500 years before the start of today's events. But what happened between then and now? Khazros' corpse, still bound and chained by the power of the Ark, was thrown into Mount Antares in Curzon, the very volcano that was the gravesite of thousands of fallen paladins sent to their demise by Therma III, now also housed the body of the Lord of the Abyss. Despite the omnipotent power of the Ark, however, the chains that bound Khazros' flesh were gradually weakening over time. The Guardians, who suffered a great loss by losing Varkon and the Guardians of Chaos to Khazros, entrusted the rebuilding of the world to humanity and left to return to their slumber. Luen, however, pleaded with Vergris to oversee the development of humanity, to which Vergris obliged. Sidereal Cien and his followers traveled east and established the city of Anika, located above Gien. This was a land that was already inhabited by Luen, who was resting after suffering serious injuries during the Chain War. Luen would grant them permission to build their new home in Anika, so long as no human entered his lair. Luen feared that the injury inflicted on him could corrupt him, potentially causing him to turn to chaos. Sidereal Cien himself was a practitioner of a martial art called Siwa. In the past, he had sealed a world-threatening catastrophe known as Dochul in his arm. In times of battle, he could call upon the chaotic powers of Dochul to overwhelm his opponents. During the Chain War, he was the only Sidereal to completely decimate his opponent. Against Akan, Cien ripped out his horns and gouged out Akan's eyes and heart from his body, forcing the demon commander to retreat and preparing for a resurrection that would take hundreds of years. However, after they settled in Anika, there came a day where Cien would temporarily lose control of Dochul. Luen, noticing the instability in Cien, tried to help him, but his own wounds would fester as a result, leaking a deadly miasma across Annika that caused the inhabitants to attack one another. Their blood scent in the air would draw the attention of demons that failed to retreat back to Petrania that wandered the lands. While they managed to fend off the demons, Cien entrusted Annika to his fellow martial artists and retreated to Prisma Valley to stay near Luen, where they could keep each other in check to avoid harm coming to others. Cien's accomplishments did not end there, however. He later hid the fragment of the Ark Karta in Phaeton, entrusting it to a friend he made named Zyka. When they first met, Cien defeated Zyka in battle and helped him learn how to control his powers, similar to how Cien suppressed Dochil, which later led to Zyka founding the Avesta of Phaeton. Cien, however, was mortal, and a human at that. The lifespan of a human among the many races of Arcacia is one of the shortest. And so, as Cien passed, he passed along his martial arts and the crucial role of sealing Dochil to his successor. This role would one day be passed on to Wei, another promising martial artist, whose master Sai would later choose him to inherit the weighty task. To the northwest was the newly founded country of Phaeton, a desolate place, home only to outcasts, who had succumbed to the power of the Red Moon.
Ooh.
These were once mortals that had gained the power and ferocity of that of demons, and because of that were generally feared by the other races and deemed exiles by the Holy Church.
I remember the Red Moon.
To escape persecution and extermination by the Church, they fled to this barren, gloomy land where life struggled to thrive. The Delane, whose name means abandoned, splintered into different factions. There were those who sought to suppress their demonic urges, believing that it was necessary in order to not lose control. But there were others that felt like they needed to give in to those powers, as they would be needed in the battles to come. Those who fell into the latter would depart from Phaeton and eventually settle in the country of Curzon, a similarly barren place where they could hide from the prying eyes of the world.
It actually looks so good.
The anguished Delane cursed the many that persecuted them. They hated the Sacrian Order, which sought to exterminate them, and whose Twilight Order would later be found kidnapping and experimenting on the Delane. They despised Kazaros, who was the main culprit for why they ended up this way in the first place. They sought to channel that power, that hate, to fuel their vengeance. Sacria itself was not without its own problems in the aftermath of the war. The first order of business was reconstructing the holy capital of Rasamoa after Vergers razed it to the ground. Many who followed the Holy Order began to recognize the corruption that grew under Archon Therma III. A long campaign would occur to expunge the Twilight Priests from the shadows. It would work for a time, but no matter how much they tried, traces of the Dark Order would continue to exist from the recesses that none could reach. Many of the priests also began to embrace the pursuit of knowledge and science over religion. These blasphemous movements would lead to their excommunication from the Holy State. This led to two camps of refugees who would later settle based on their differing beliefs in the pursuit of knowledge. The ones that settled to the southwest eventually established the city of Voldis, an advanced civilization whose primary goal was the collection of all knowledge in the world.
True, it is
They kept the
Southwest.
darkest
Very
secrets in
true,
the
very
forbidden
true.
library they called Umbella. The sages of Voldis were also practitioners of the Golden Path, a unique power that coursed explosive magic through their veins.
Wow.
The other faction of knowledge seekers made their way to the red sands of Arthetine, next to Curzon. There they established their capital called Tatrich. As the civilization and technology grew and industry developed, they would move the capital to the city of Stern, which later became the most technologically advanced city in Arcacia. In this futuristic city, many embraced the idea that the flesh is weak, to embrace the machine and replace their body parts with metal and their blood with blue fuel. These cyborgs called themselves Psykin.
Cool.
Finally, Lutera, who had returned to Rethramis, eventually united the city-states of the Federation. under
Lutera's
its own
cute.
name.
I don't know how I
The
missed
efforts
this.
of Lutera
I
resounded throughout the world for
totally
the
didn't
next
know about
500
this.
years, as the mortal races
Thought
continued
Lutera
to
was
prosper
just
in
the
times of
city.
peace. But waiting in the midst, disembodied soul from flesh, was Kazaros, plotting his return and his revenge, to finish what he started and lay claim to the Ark. Regardless of the origin of your story, your path eventually takes you to Trua, the Forgotten Land. It is here that you discover your fate as the new inheritor of the Ark. Summoned to Trixion, a place high above that watches over the land, your story to save Arcacia begins here. Beatrice, a Lazanith who was selected to become a watcher of the world's fate, sends you on a mission to collect the scattered fragments
That's
of the Ark
beautiful.
that were hidden by the Sidereals hundreds of years prior. At your first destination in Pride Home, you encounter and rescue Collect Land. Your story to save Arcacia begins here. Beatrice, a Lazanith who was selected to become a watcher of the world's fate, sends you on a mission to collect the scattered fragments of the Ark that were hidden by the Sidereals hundreds of years prior. At your first destination in Pride Home, you encounter and rescue a Sagrian priest by the name of Armin.
Oh, he's
Together,
a
you make for
priest.
the church in the nearby town of Prideholm in
thought
search
he
of
was a
clues to locate
sorcerer.
the first Ark. Here within the church is a stone tablet with clues written on it that lead to the piece of the Ark that the late King Lutera had hidden. Unfortunately, a piece of it had been stolen by bandits in a nearby cave. Fighting through the bandit crew, you witness a tall, gaunt figure wielding a staff rendezvousing with their leader. Carmine, an agent of the demons, quickly absconds back to Prideholm.
Carmine is my
with a piece
favorite
of the
character.
Stone tablet, leaving the bandit leader to deal with you. Hurrying back to Prideholm, you find the town in a state of chaos. Everything is on fire, and the townspeople are under siege by demons. Battling your way to the church while also protecting helpless
This is so good for me because I actually watch cutscenes.
citizens, you eventually make your way to where the stone tablet is, confronting Carmine. Armin, at this point, reveals himself to be a Delane, manifesting his demonic powers to overwhelm Carmine and send him retreating. With new knowledge from the completed tablet, your journey takes you east to the deserts of Eudia. There, in the ruins of Morai, the former capital of the ancient Enkavia kingdom, you discover the Sword Seal, one of the keys needed to access the resting place of the late Sidereal Lutera. Traveling further through Rethramis, you make contact with the outcasted prince of Lutera, Thyrane. He was removed from his own castle by his uncle and the current lord of the region, Sherrit. Unable to unlock the power of the late King Lutera's sword Vanquisher, Thyrane sees himself as a failure, but is ushered by his peers to retake the castle and the throne. In the confrontation that follows, Demon Beast Commander Volten is summoned to support Sherritt's side and immediately recognizes Vanquisher, as it was the very same sword that once inflicted a grave wound upon him 500 years ago.
Oh my gosh.
He taunts Thyrane for not being able to manifest Vanquisher's true power, which leads to
Whose sword?
In the confrontation that follows, the late King Lutera's sword Vanquisher, Thyrane sees himself as a failure, but is ushered by his peers to retake the castle and the throne. In the confrontation that follows, Demon Beast Commander Volten is summoned to support Sherritt's side and immediately recognizes Vanquisher, as it was the very same sword that once inflicted a grave wound upon him 500 years ago. He taunts Thyrane for not being able to manifest Vanquisher's true power, which leads to Thyrane's awakening. But before they could clash, Carmine appears and dismisses Volten from the battlefield before taking his own exit.
Does not even look like Volten.
With Vanquisher's potential unlocked, the prince's force encroached on Lutera Castle, aiming to take back the throne from the corrupt Lord Sherritt. The castle siege gives way as you, Armin, and Thyrane approach the throne room where Sherritt awaits. Having made a deal with the demons, Sherritt tries to turn you over to his side, only to be struck down in the process. Carmine once again summons Commander Volten into the fray, who after a short bout defeats you. But through the combined powers of a transformed Armin and the light of Vanquisher, a powerful blow is dealt to Volten that sends him reeling. This was enough to allow Carmine to intervene, betraying Volten and absorbing the commander's power before disappearing. With Sherritt defeated and the incumbent regime surrendered, Prince Thyrane takes the throne and the city is retaken under his rightful rule. Peace was eventually restored to Rethramis, and your search for Lutera's tomb brings you to Lastra Forest, where the resting place of the late king awaits. Thyrane entrusts the Eagle Seal, an heirloom of the royal family, to you, which provides you both the necessary keys needed to enter the royal tomb. It's there that the first of the fragments of the Ark is discovered, Asta, the Ark of Trust. The spirit of old King Lutera appears, telling you that there
The story makes so much sense. All of these little characters, they own like their own little territories and stuff.
Six
But
more
that's really
fragments
cool.
to recover, and that the fate
Didn't
of the world
realize.
depends on the success of your mission. However, in the wake of Vultan's defeat, the Legion commanders under Kazuros' order begin to maneuver. Vicus heads to Annika to prepare a vessel that could serve as a body for Kazuros. Belshazzar goes to Rohendel, where she claims she has unfinished business. Kakul Sedon, mocking Vultan for his failure, decides to take matters into his own hands and directly confront the band of heroes in Rethramus. Thus, Kakul arrives in eastern Lutera, where the influence of his madness quickly encroaches on the citizens of that region. This culminates in an all-out assault.
I like this part. You have lobby up? Yeah, I have it. Yeah, every race. Oh, I see. That makes sense. Kind of reminds me of World of Warcraft. I'm gonna make some noodles, but I can see if I can pull some people. That'd be really cool if you join. It will pull people. So I will see it and add you.
And that the fate of the world depends on the success of your mission.
Yeah, lobby's up.
However, in the wake of Vultan's defeat, the Legion commanders...
And that is exactly what I do. I kind of see which kind of bus has what pull. The different buses have different pulls. Like if it's a streamer, everybody will join the room.
under Kazuros' order begin to maneuver. Vicus heads to Annika to prepare a vessel that could serve as a body for Kazuros. Belshazzar goes to Rohendel, where she claims she has unfinished business.
Unfinished.
Kakul Sedon, mocking Vultan for his failure, decides to take matters into his own hands and directly confront the band of heroes in Rethramus. Thus, Kakul arrives in eastern Lutera, where the influence of his madness quickly encroaches on the citizens of that region. This culminates in an all-out assault from the Mayhem Legion at the Borea estate, where Kakul is finally defeated. The weakened Kakul demands that Carmine opens a portal back to Petrania so that he can recover his wounds. But Carmine, much like against Vultan, betrays Kakul and absorbs his powers.
Oh shit, that's actually so freaking smart!
An all-out assault from the Mayhem Legion at the Borea estate, where Kakul is finally defeated. The weakened Kakul demands that Carmine opens a portal back to Petrania so that he can recover his wounds. But Carmine, much like against Vultan, betrays Kakul and absorbs his powers. While he doesn't directly confront the band of heroes in Rethramus. Thus, Kakul arrives in eastern Lutera, where the influence of his madness quickly encroaches on the citizens of that region.
JB heals.
This culminates in an
1700.
all-out assault from the
You're
Mayhem
crazy.
Legion at the Borea estate, where Kakul
Crazy
is
rich.
Belshazzar goes to Rohendel, where she claims she has unfinished business. Kakul Sedon, mocking Vultan for his failure, decides to take matters into his own hands and directly confront the band of heroes in Rethramus. Thus, Kakul arrives in eastern Lutera, where the influence of his madness quickly encroaches on the citizens of that region. This culminates in an all-out assault from the Mayhem Legion at the Borea estate, where Kakul is finally defeated. The weakened Kakul demands that Carmine
that's
opens
what
the
literally
portal
weakened
back to
Kakul
Petrania
card.
so that he can recover his wounds.
Shit.
But Carmine, much like against Vultan, betrays Kakul and absorbs his powers. While he
This is the
does
coolest part of the
manifest
whole
some
video.
of Kakul's powers, Kakul manages to survive this ordeal, as this other half Sedon uses the power of the shadows to bring him back to life in a weakened state. Carmine and Kakul part ways here, as Carmine gained new power, and Kakul decided to change his goals, now that the others believed him to be dead. He would be freely able to operate without rousing any suspicion.
Oh
With news
shit.
of the invasion, the holy capital of Sacria dispatches Executor Solus, a priest secretly aligned with the Twilight faction, to investigate what is
The
happening
music is
in
good.
that region.
It's
Solus
Lost Ark
corners
music.
a group of Luteran citizens that he deems corrupted by the demons' influence and sentences them to death. Armin arrives protesting that they are not a threat and not diseased. Solus dismisses his pleas and kills them all on the spot regardless, sending Armin into a demonic frenzy and resulting in the destruction of all of
I
Sacria's
feel bad for
emissaries,
Armin.
including Solus himself. You and King Thyrane arrive on the scene and witness the ordeal, pleading with Armin to provide a reason as to why he murdered ambassadors of the Holy Capital. Anything to prove his innocence so that they don't frame him as guilty for this transgression. Armin, broken and having given up on humanity after years and years of trauma resurfacing, leaves with Carmine and abandons everyone. With heavy losses, you must carry on the mission of locating the arcs. Doing so requires a vessel worthy of seafaring, which brings you face to face with Blackfang, one of the pirate lords of the sea. Thyrane offers to parley with Blackfang, working together in order to commandeer a boat for you. There are 4 lords of the seas in Arcacia. They each lead their own faction and seek the treasure of the missing pirate king, Bloodclaw. Because of this, the seas themselves are turbulent with conflict between the lords, with the Redfin pirates under Red Calamity Narkiel being the most notoriously violent. After commandeering a boat hidden in a pirate alcove, you set sail to Wisdom Island to the south. There, knowledge about the heart of the giant Tortoik is learned, and the next destination is set. Arriving at Tortoik, the influence of the Redfin pirates is already clear. Many of them are found attacking the local Makoko people who inhabit the island. After saving the Makoko people, you make your way to the heart of the island, which serves as the resting place of the Ark of Creation, Ortus. After overcoming the giant's trial and obtaining the Ark, the voice of the sidereal Nineveh is heard, who entrusts you with
Nineveh.
the Ark and mentions that one day
Nineveh.
the 2 of you will meet. Traveling further east, you arrive at the Eastern Cultural City and home to many martial artists, Anika. Here, a tournament of power is being held to crown the first sword of Chenghun. However, behind the scenes, the demon commander Vicus is preparing sacrifices in order to summon a creature from the abyss to serve as Khazros' vessel. She manipulates the desires of Habek, the current champion, for her own devices. After obtaining all the components needed, she summons Banda from the fold and attempts to use him to destroy you.
Oh yes. Oh,
Wei,
that's
the
cool.
successor of the late sidereal Cien, comes to your aid to deal with Vicus.
It's
and
like
help
the
you make
new
your escape.
boss.
Successfully foiling Vicus's plan, you learn that there is no Ark in Anika, but that your next destination will be the technological city of Arthatine.
There's no
Wei also
arc.
comes to terms with his responsibilities as the new sidereal and embarks on his own journey, finally leaving Anika in the capable hands of its martial artists. Sailing north, the hero arrives at the port of the Arid Path, where the tram takes them to the capital of Stern. There, you learn that a terrorist group under the command of former head of technology, Kraus,
What?
is attempting to take control of a powerful device called the Verdentier, a tower with the ability to create an artificial sun. Kraus was a radical who firmly believed
Oh,
that only
Kraus.
they could
Purple
control their
card.
own fates, and so they had to take power into their own
He
hands
looks
in order
weird.
to stave off the
Is he a
impending
cyborg?
darkness. To that end, he sought to turn himself into a god, since the gods of the old world had abandoned them. This was an
Interesting.
idea that was considered too radical, and the leaders of Arthatine sought to oppose his plans. Kraus believed that despite the means, what he was doing was the right thing if it meant he could protect Arthatine in the end. Ultimately, he and his allies meet their end by your hand at the apex of the Verdentier. For stopping Kraus's madness, the city entrusts the Ark of Prescience, Agaton, to you. This
Why
was
does he
the
have
ark
to be mad?
found by
I think it's a
Elon
great
and
idea.
Galator in the past. The next stop would be to find the Ark hidden in Shoeshire by Sidereal Shandy. However, upon trying to sail there, you realize that your boat cannot breach the sheets of ice that block the route to the icy
I
continent.
remember
And
this.
so a detour is taken to the city at the center of the world, Vern. Upon arrival, the port is in a state of disarray under attack by the
Dar.
undead. An ancient necromancer from a century ago had returned to the world of the living alongside the demonic dragon Garum. However, unexpectedly, there was another person who was resurrected, the former commander of the Solar Knights of Vern, who
Thor!
had came to the hero's aid to repel Sigmund and Garum. Entering the city itself,
I
you
didn't know
become
he was really a
acquainted with
knight.
the Queen Aelin, as well as the leader of the Lunar Knights, Avel.
Queen
With Thor
indeed.
resurrected, the focus is then put on foiling the scheme of his arch-nemesis Sigmund. Sigmund's plan to detonate a magical core which would completely obliterate Vern and the surrounding area. While the hero succeeds in defeating Sigmund, they're unable to defuse the magic core. With no options remaining, the hero and Thor are helpless to prevent the destruction of the continent. But just then, a colossal dragon arrives at the scene, who Thor immediately recognized as the progenitor of all guardians, Vergris. The dragon speaks directly to the inheritor, telling them that it is the duty of the guardians to reset the world when its safety is put in jeopardy. Vergris asks the hero to travel to the homeland of the Lazinith, Algacia, where they will have to prove that the mortal races are worthy of being spared. Vergris then departs, but not before deactivating
Reset the
magic
world?
core,
What
saving
the
the continent
heck?
from assured destruction. With the safety of Vern achieved, the icebreaker is given as a promised reward, a mighty seafaring vessel that could easily pierce through the Arctic Sea. The cold lands of Shushire are ruthless and unforgiving. Decimated by the god of ice Sirius 1,000 years prior during the first recorded war against the god of chaos, Zazma, Shushire is perpetually frozen in a layer of ice that will never melt.
Spare the
Because of
peasants.
this, its inhabitants must persevere through difficult conditions, leading many to end up as slaves and gladiators, fighting for the amusement of the wealthy that control those lands. The cruel and unjust Vrad, who operates the gladiator arena, makes an appearance in a nearby town. Vrad deviously loans out money to struggling people, and when they're unable to pay it back, he enslaves them and forces them to die a dog's death in the gladiator's arena. A tall and proud warrior by the name of Gene Madnick stands up against them, and he is taken away,
Oh, Madnick.
offering himself
He
in
has
place
a
of the one
card.
who isn't able to pay
He
their
has a-
debts.
He
Making
sells
their way to the
cards.
arena, you join Madnick in staving off Vrad's
He's
wild
NPC.
beasts. But before the two of you are able to deal with Vrad himself, he beckons the Lord of Decay and Legion Commander Akan. Akan, who seeks to locate the Ark hidden by Sidereal Shandy, uses Vrad in order to find its whereabouts. Having served his usefulness, Vrad finds himself becoming food for demonic insects. The trail brings you to a mystical place called the Maze of Mirrors, where the Ark of Hope, Elpon, resides. This was a labyrinth set up by the Yaz sage Shandy, made to keep the Ark away from those who sought it.
Oh.
Akan, who desired the Ark in order to absorb its power to gain an everlasting body, is thwarted by you and forced to retreat. The main
What? I
Scion,
never got to this part.
recognizing that the Ark is too great of a power for Shushire to protect, entrusts it with the inheritor. With Shushire left in good hands, you depart to the far west. Towards
I just
the
don't
land of
understand if they
Sylvan
left the Ark there and
Rohirrim.
they just put the
This
warrior
was the
there, or
home
they
of the
gave,
Elven
I don't
Masters
know,
of Magic,
whatever.
who kept themselves isolated for many years in the aftermath of the Chain War that had occurred 500 years prior. Not long after arriving, you meet the famed sorceress and queen of Rohendel, Azena. A catastrophe many centuries prior led to the untimely death of her sister Inanna. However, the world's
I didn't
king
know there were
Elzevin was able
sisters.
to bind the soul of her sister to her, making it so that two souls
Makes a
inhabited
lot of
a
sense
single
now.
body. Lurking in the shadows, a devious plot was being put in motion by the Phantom Legion commander, Brelshaza. The object of Azena's hatred, Brelshaza sought to bring destruction to the Sylvain by
I thought they were
orchestrating a
friends.
plan that involved deceiving the elemental masters of
Inanna
Rohendel.
and Azina.
Brelshaza uses her illusory magic to trick the elemental masters of Rohendel into thinking that Queen Azena was working against the Sylvain race. At every turn, Brelshaza seems one step ahead of the hero until finally facing off against her in the Phantom Palace.
It makes sense.
Defeating
It makes sense she has like illusionary powers though. That's really cool. That's why her last like gate 4 is like with all like the platforms and the illusions. Not mirrors, but
Shaza, with the help of the queen, forces her to retreat, where you then arrive at the roots of Elzevin and obtain the Ark of Wisdom, Rati.
I see. see.
The journey then takes you south to the homeland of the mighty Umar, the world's
Oh, this is jam-packed!
You meet the famed who kept themselves isolated from Azena to her, Gaza, of Rohendel, of Azena's hatred.
Jam-packed. I love this story. Apparently, I have no pull. I'm gonna wait while I eat, but if we can't get anyone, I'm gonna do a few dailies before the gym. No worries at all. It's like not really important raid also. I just wanna do something before I continue. Hey, my normal's kind of dead zone. I know, but I was just hoping people would still help me though. Nobody you ask to help? No, I didn't ask anyone today. I feel bad asking for like these raids. I ask for only my 9 main raids: Echidna Hard, Thamine Hard, and Behemoth. I asked the streamers for that one. But if it's just me doing low level raid, I don't ask them. Cause I feel like I don't wanna like waste. Yeah, I never ask the streamers for low raids, only high raids. Because I don't want to waste their time. Alright, let me continue the video. Finally.
Belshazzar sought to bring destruction to the Sylvan by orchestrating a plan that involved deceiving the elemental masters of Rohendel. Belshazzar uses
Elemental
illusory
masters.
magic to trick the
Illusionary
elemental
magic.
masters of Rohendel into thinking that Queen Azena was working against the Sylvain race.
Have you done solo Thamine? I'm not
Every
doing it
turn,
solo.
Belshazzar seems one
I
step
don't
ahead
solo
of the
raid
hero
anymore.
until finally facing off against
Now that
her
I
in
am the
fantasy
cute
battles.
dolls.
Defeating Belshazzar with the help of the queen forces her to retreat, where you then arrive at the roots of Elzarin and obtain the Ark
We
of
do
Wisdom
Party Finder, or it
The
just
journey then takes you south
doesn't
to
get
the
done.
homeland of the
That's
mighty
just simply
Umar,
it.
the world's finest
Those
craftsmen
are the only
and
two
blacksmiths.
choices.
Upon arriving, you overhear
Rest in
rumors
peace,
of a
solo
serial
mode.
killer on the loose who wields a sword capable of stealing the life essence of its victims.
Rest in peace.
Traveling to the great
Rest
castle
in pieces.
the heart of Yorn, you meet the descendant of the legendary blacksmith Sidereal Galator. He is drowning himself in alcohol, wallowing in his failure to live up to his great ancestor.
The only time I'll do
The
solo
sword ends up
mode
being
is
located
for
in which the
Makoko
mighty
events.
powers devour the life
When it
essence
has
of
like
the
that
many
solo
demons who
thing.
try to wield it, including the rumored serial killer that the hero heard about when they had arrived. The sword, Velcruz, was the product of 2 dwarven blacksmiths that experimented with demonic power. Even after defeating the wielder of Velcruz, the sword survives and ends up in the hands of Carmine, who easily tames the sword despite its attempt to consume him.
Hell yeah.
Before departing from Yorn, Balthor, the descendant of Galator, spirited with new confidence, repairs Thyrane's broken sword, Vanquisher. Sailing north brings you to the desecrated land, Phaeton. Here, you come in contact
Does
with
he
a
show
member of the
Vanquisher? Because I
Avesta,
looked down
an
for that
organized
second.
syndicate that looks after the wielder of
Can I just hear
Velkoke,
this
and its
again?
demonic powers devour the life essence of the many demons that
JJ!
presently live it, including the rumored
Veg!
serial killer that the hero heard about when they had arrived. The sword, Velcruz, was the product of two dwarven blacksmiths that experimented with demonic power. Even after defeating the wielder of Velcruz, the sword survives and ends up in the hands of
Wow.
Carmen, who easily tames the sword despite its attempt to consume him.
Amazing.
Before departing from Yorn, Balthor,
I love that this
the
game does
descendant
the
of
sword
Galathir,
has the power, not the
spirited with
person.
new
I love that.
confidence, repairs Thyrane's broken sword.
My other games is
Vanquisher.
not like that.
Sailing north brings you to the desecrated land, Phaeton. Here, you come in contact with a member of the Avesta, an organized syndicate that looks after exiled Delane and seeks to teach them how to control their demonic urges. Sacria had once again dispatched a battalion of priests led by a powerful member of the church, Jedrico. Under the suspicion that the Delane were colluding with demons, they apprehend the leader of the Avesta, Zyka. You learn that some of the Delane desired to break free from the rules that Zyka imposed on them, instead electing to embrace chaos and the power of the demonic urges. Zyka explains that he himself would regularly manifest these powers as a means of protecting his kind so that those around him would not have to. Despite reuniting Zyka with the Avesta, a far greater danger looms over the horizon as the Black Rain approaches. Zyka, who had learned that the Black Rain was an omen of death from his old friend Sidereal Cien, prepared the Delane for a battle that could be their last. You plead with Jederico of the Sacrian Order to support the forces of Phaeton, as without the help of the priests, they would be overwhelmed by demons. Jederico refuses to the request, leaving the fate of the Delane to themselves. As the Black Rain begins its descent, hordes of demons spill out of the Chaos Gates onto the barren land. For a short while, the Delane are able to hold them at bay, but find themselves cornered in no time. When all hope seems lost, a blinding ray of light fell upon the demons, repelling them and giving the Delane much-needed breathing room. Jederico and the Dawn Priests arrive, having changed their mind in order to help the Delane.
Jederico, he has a card too. I love
While
cards
the combined
now.
forces are able to stave off the invasion, when suddenly it had stopped, and the demons gazed up towards the sky. An imposing figure descended from up above.
Who is
the
it?
Master of Darkness and the most powerful of Khazros' Legion commanders had arrived. Thamine, in a single motion, swept the battlefield in a cloud of deadly miasma, vaporizing anyone that was unlucky to be caught in it. Thamine deduced that which he sought was not present on the battlefield. The commander was prepared to leave, but not before unleashing a deadly cloud of darkness that would likely wipe out the remaining Delane and the priests. Zyka, in an act of self-sacrifice, stood before Thamine and chose to absorb the darkness within his own body to protect everyone else. This would be too much for him to handle, and the darkness would consume him, forcing him to rely on the hero to put him down and save his own people. In his final moments,
I like the
he
darkness
reflected
consume
on
theme.
how all his life he was
Very
treated
cool.
as a demon, but he hoped that in his greatest moment that he died not as a monster,
It's a
but
motif.
as a human.
It's a recurring theme.
After the funeral, a message is passed along to you leading to the location of the Ark of Devotion, Karta. This was the fragment of the Ark that was hidden in a grove here by Sidereal Cien, who had befriended Zyka in the past and helped guide the Delane toward a path of self-preservation. After the events of Phaeton, Allegro, a wandering minstrel that had once taught you the song to teleport back to Beatrice and Trixium, instructs you to awaken the sleeping Sidereal Nineveh. She was struck by Thamine 500 years ago in her wing, and after the war fell into a long slumber to recover the damage. and
Freaking
prevent
Snow
the
White
corruption of
over
the
here.
war
Oh my god.
on Whispering Isle. Hers was the voice that was heard when you overcame Tortoic's trial and obtained the Ark of Creation, or Tus. Nineveh, a master
Sleeping
archer
Beauty.
and one of the Lazaneth's greatest warriors, would become the one fated to walk alongside the inheritor in their destiny. Sailing south in search of the final fragment of the Ark, the ship is caught in a violent sea storm, and you end up washed onto the sunny shores of Punica, an island
Hi,
inhabited by the
Athena!
Neo tribe, an ancient group of people created by Gianna, You find that the lands are being influenced by the same peril that plagued Lutera in the past. The forces of the Mayhem Legion were present and actively turning the people of Punica mad. The sinister Kakul Sedon, weakened, held the chief of the Nia
Weakened?
captive. After saving her, you then investigate the whereabouts of the village's chief of medicine, Nagi. You manage to rescue her from the vices of one of Kakul's followers, Seto. Afterwards, you trace the whereabouts of Kakul to the seed of the island. Kakul sought to absorb the essence of the seed to regain his vitality, since he was still...
Fun fact, the first lore I ever heard about it Lost Ark, I was doing circus with a whole bunch of people, and they were teaching me circus for like over 5 hours, and it was on my stream, and the guy, he was like, okay, watch this video from Memorizer to learn how to play circus. But then he started telling me the lore. He's like, Sato Kakul is this evil clown, blah, blah, blah. That was the first lore I ever had.
Weakened after his confrontation with Carmine back in Rethramis. Kakul corrupts the protector guardian of the island, Albion. The ancient creature goes on a rampage, threatening the safety of Punica's villagers. Nia, summoning the courage to face the protector of the island, sings an ancient song.
Clearly the story... Damn!
While Kakul managed to escape with what he wanted, at the very least,
I have my suspicions
Punica
about
was
you.
saved. You are then summoned by Nineveh, who wants you to locate the last member of the Sidereals, Kadan. Heralded as the strongest of the mortal races, he was a key part in the Chain War 500 years ago, but went into hiding after Khazros' defeat. With the help of the other Sidereals, the trail leads to Asteri Island, a remote fishing hamlet in the middle of nowhere in the ocean. Kadan had hidden himself here, living as a vagabond. However, as you locate Kadan and persuade him to resume his sidereal duties, Asteri Island is suddenly ambushed by a slew of Chaos Guardians, forcing Kadan to take action to protect the people he put at risk just by being there. After protecting the island's inhabitants and repelling the Chaos Guardians, Kadan
That's what I
decided to
do
lead Asteri
in all my
Island,
stories.
taking on the mantle of a Siderial.
In all my stories, I always say blah, blah, blah. Or whenever I'm reading something, I just go blah, blah, blah. It just means like, etc.
Once more.
I can't retell a story every single time.
Northburn by Queen Aelin. Avel, the captain of the Lunar Knights, had gone missing while investigating problems in South Vern, and the Senate was beginning to maneuver with the intent of undermining the authority of the Queen. Aelin requested that you locate the missing Avel.
Anyway,
With the help of the Guildmaster of the Adventurers Guild.
Anyway, I'm not Madge. I'm just pointing it out. I'm not Madge. I didn't put a Madge emote. I put one Madge emote, but it didn't go.
A mage guide named Zarion to accompany you in South Vern. Zarion, who was once formerly a Solar Knight under the Captain Thar, had gone through a great deal of trauma after he had deserted his military post in the past. This haunted him as he believed...
I had to point you out because you keep poking me.
Ludwig, a former ally of his, placed much blame on him for the fate of their fellow knights, branding him as a traitor. The Inheritor aims
Blah, blah,
to
blah.
eliminate the Solar Knights after the Senate betrays Vern, helping the demons of Petrania by lowering the barriers protecting the city. The demons, having tricked the members of the Senate, disposed of their pawns after they served their purpose. With the barrier lowered, the Legion commanders were poised to begin their invasion of Arcacia.
Missed a lot. Let me go back. Yeah, I'm supposed to have Madge, but maybe it needs to get approved. I mean, like, what do you think is gonna happen to you? I'm not gonna ban you. I don't care if you make fun of me. I don't need to ban you.
Threatening the safety of Punica's villagers, Nia, summoning the courage to face the protector of the island, sings an ancient song that has the power to quell Albion's rage.
Okay.
While Kakul managed to escape with what he wanted, at the very least, Punica was saved. You are then summoned by Nineveh, who wants you to locate the last member of the Sidereals, Kadan. Heralded as the strongest of the mortal races, he was a key part in the Chain War 500 years ago, but went into hiding after Khazros' defeat. With the help of the other sidereals, the trail leads to Asteri Island, a remote fishing hamlet in the middle of nowhere in the ocean. Kadan had hidden himself here, living as a vagabond. However, as you locate Kadan and persuade him to resume his sidereal duties, Asteri Island is suddenly ambushed by a search of the final fragment Ros's Legion commanders had arrived. Famine, in a single motion,
Good music.
swept the battlefield in a cloud of deadly miasma, vaporizing anyone that was unlucky to be caught in it. Famine deduced that which he sought was not present on the battlefield. The commander was prepared to leave, but not before unleashing a deadly cloud of darkness that would likely wipe out the remaining Delane and the priests. Zyka, in an act of self-sacrifice, stood before Famine and chose to absorb the darkness within his own body to protect everyone else. This would be too much for him to handle, and the darkness would consume him, forcing him to rely on the hero to put him down and save his own people. In his final moments, he reflected on how all his life he was treated as a demon, but he hoped that in his greatest moment that he died not as a monster, but as a human. After the funeral, a message is passed along to you leading to the location of the Ark of Devotion, Karta. This was the fragment of the Ark that was hidden in a grove here by Sidereal Cien, who had befriended Zyka in the past and helped guide the Delane toward a path of self-preservation. After the events of Phaeton, Allegro, a wandering minstrel that had once taught you the song to teleport back to Beatrice and Trixion, instructs you to awaken the sleeping Sidereal Nineveh. She was struck by Famine 500 years ago in her wing, and after the war fell into a long slumber to recover the damage and prevent the corruption of the wound on Whispering Isle. Hers was the voice that was heard when you overcame Tortoic's trial and obtained the Ark of Creation, Ortus. Nineveh, a master archer and one of the Lazineth's
I have almost 10K hours and I don't any of this.
to walk alongside the inheritor in their destiny. Sailing south in search of the final fragment of the Ark,
I think I have
ship
like
is
4K
caught
hours.
in a violent sea storm, and you end up washed onto the sunny shores of Punica, an island inhabited by the Nia tribe, an ancient group of people created by Gianna. You find that the lands are being influenced by the same peril that plagued Lutera in the past. The forces of the Mayhem Legion were present and actively turning the people of Punica mad. The sinister Kakul Sedon, weakened, held the chief of the Nia captive. After saving her, you then investigate the whereabouts of the village's chief of medicine, Nagi. You manage to rescue her from the vices of one of Kakul's followers, Seto. Afterwards, you trace...
Okay, well, if you were not making fun of me, then good, because then I re-evaluated everything else that everyone else did that I thought they were making fun. Maybe I was just never being made fun
the
of.
whereabouts of Kakul
So
to the
I
seat
feel
of the
better
island.
now.
Kakul sought to absorb the essence of the sea to regain his vitality,
Easy.
since he was still weakened after his confrontation with Carmine back in Rethramis. Kakul corrupts the protector guardian of the island, Albion. The ancient creature goes on a rampage, threatening the safety of Punica's villagers. Nia, summoning the courage to face the protector of the island, sings an ancient song that has the power to quell Albion's rage. While Kakul managed to escape with what he wanted, at the very least, Punica was saved. You are then summoned by Nineveh, who wants you to locate the last member of the Sidereals, Kadan. Heralded as the strongest of the mortal races, he was a key part in the Chain War 500 years ago, but went into hiding after Khazros' defeat. With the help of the other Sidereals, the trail leads to Asteri Island, a remote fishing hamlet in the middle of nowhere in the ocean. Kadan had hidden himself here, living as a vagabond. However, as you locate Kadan and persuade him to resume his sidereal duties, Asteri Island is suddenly ambushed by a slew of Chaos Guardians, forcing Kadan to take action
He's a
to protect
Thamine
the people
sidereal.
he put at risk just by being there. After protecting the island's inhabitants and repelling the Chaos Guardians, Kadan decided to leave Asteri Island, taking on the mantle of a sidereal once more. After the events of Punica, you are summoned back to North Vern by Queen Aelin. Avel, the captain of the Lunar Knights, had gone missing while investigating problems in South Vern, and the Senate was beginning to maneuver with the intent of undermining the authority of the Queen. Aelin requested that you locate the missing Avel. With the help of the Guildmaster of the Adventurers Guild, Gideon, you were assigned a mage guide named Zarion to accompany you in South Vern. Zarion, who was once formerly a solar knight under the Captain Thar, had gone through a great deal of trauma after he had deserted his military post in the past. This haunted him as he believed it led to the demise of many of his companions. Ludwig, a former ally of his, placed much blame on him for the fate of their fellow knights, branding him as a traitor. The Inheritor aims to reunite the Solar Knights after the Senate betrays Vern, helping the demons of Petrania by lowering the barriers protecting the city. The demons, having tricked the members of the Senate, disposed of their pawns after they served their purpose. With the barrier lowered, the Legion commanders were poised to begin their invasion of Arcacia. Zarion, in an attempt to redeem himself, sacrifices his own life so that you and your allies could escape the Legion commanders. Thar, the former commander of the Solar Knights, still resurrected, took command of the reunited regiment, rallying them under his banner to prepare for the counteroffensive. With the main focus of the invasion occurring at the center of the world, Allied forces whom the hero had helped in the past sent reinforcements to bolster the defense against the demonic invasion. Warriors from every continent and all the Sidereals rallied at one point to fight them off. This begins the Allied forces' counteroffensive against Khazros' Legion commanders. With an active plan put into motion to defeat each of the key leaders of the demon army, one by one. Volton, who had previously been defeated in Lutera and absorbed by Carmine, had his soul resurrected by a Khan, forced to serve as minion under the Lord of Decay. Once he was defeated, Volton's soul once again dissipated into nothingness. Vicus returns to Annika, where she begins sowing discord in the continent once again. In her final desperate moments, Vicus attempts to command the covetous domain to do her bidding, only to realize that it will not listen to her, and she is instead consumed by it. Kakul Sedon was no longer a Legion commander. However, he instead invites you to the Midnight Circus in an attempt to gauge whether or not you were growing strong enough to complete your mission. Satisfied with the results of his test, Kakul gracefully exits, leaving the hero to their own devices. Belshazzar, the most cunning of all the commanders, would require the full coordinated efforts of all the Sidereals. She sought to obtain Astalgia, a vital component to fulfill the prophecy of the Witch of Chaos. This was a physical construct manifested by primal nightmare, accumulating negative energy in the world. The Allied forces are able to repel her, but in the end are unable to thwart her mission, and she's able to successfully deliver Astalgia to Khazros. Astalgia would be used by a Khan to summon the Red Moon in Arcacia. After attempting to deal with Belshazzar, you take a detour to investigate the problems in Rowan. When arriving at the port, there are already issues as the local Tarunian tribes are attacking the colonists that have occupied near the port. Those besieged describe the aggressors as lawless savages. Among those who are encamped is a Sacrian missionary paladin by the name of Osphir. Despite being an enemy of the Tarunian, Osphir encounters and saves one of their archers by the name of Danica from danger.
Whoa.
Together, they investigate the Tarunian, only to find that the colonists have been the main aggressors all this time, having captured and enslaved innocents to mine precious Silmail bloodstone from quarries. As the hero earns an opportunity to get better acquainted with the Tarunian tribe, they attempt to mend wounds between factions by establishing diplomacy between the tribes and the Sacrians. The Tarunians consider it, but are subsequently double-crossed by the Sacrians, who take to slaughtering the tribesmen. Osphir, unable to overcome the deep-rooted brainwashing that his holy order performed on him, becomes an enemy in the end, believing that the Twilight priests are in the right. His actions summon reinforcements from the Twilight Order to ambush an already weakened Tarunian tribe, forcing them to the edge of the cliffside before systematically murdering children, adults, and elders indiscriminately. You and the surviving Tarunian are forced to flee and try to figure a new plan to cross the fog and head towards the tribe's promised land, Starsguard. In the final confrontation, Miun, the Tarunian chief, is able to take down the Twilight Archbishop Wilhelm, who had infused himself with Silmael bloodstone. However, his life is taken by a treacherous Osfir, who, despite having his life spared by the Tarunian archer Danica just moments prior, attempts to stab the hero in the back. Mion shoves them out of the way and takes the dagger to his chest, sacrificing himself. Mion asks the hero to take his people to Starsgard, a place of great importance to the Tarunian, to which they agree to the dying chief's request. The story of the surviving tribesmen traveling to Starsgard will continue in a future episode. Before resuming the campaign against the Legion commanders, you are summoned back to Whispering Isle by Nineveh. Kadan is also present, and they plan to travel to Algacia, the land of the Lazaneth, in order to recruit them in the conflict ahead against Kazaros. The trio travel to the sealed gate.
The music is so good! The music is so good!
However, Kadan easily overwhelms Alair, forcing
I think the city music will always be my favorite.
Nineveh summons Albion, and the three mount the winged guardian to ascend into the sky. Arriving at the gates of Algacia's capital, Arianor, the three are met by one of the swords of the Lazaneth and childhood friend of Nineveh, Azakil. Kadan is also welcomed back, albeit coldly. While catching up with old comrades, you and Nineveh learned that one of the other swords, Diogenes, had gone missing not long ago, and in his place at the council now stood the cold and logical Prunya. At the convening of the swords, the Lazaneth's strongest warriors, Nineveh pleads to her old comrades, asking them to lend their
I can't believe Prunya is even in the lore. That is so cool.
support to the mortal races in the upcoming war against Kazaros. Loriel, the leader of the swords for the past millennia, summons an edict from the gods, who prohibit them from leaving Algacia. It was the same revelation that prevented their intervention in the chain war that had occurred 500 years prior. Despite Nineveh's protests, Loriel stands by the decision and dismisses the case. Azakil calls for Nineveh and the hero and reveals to them that he is investigating the disappearance of Diogenes. Diogenes was looking into a phenomenon called the Light's Judgment, but would end up painting a target on his own back for looking in places where he shouldn't have. Azakil also mentions how in the 500 years where Nineveh had left Algacia, the Round Table of Swords had been entirely taken over by Loriel. While accompanying Nineveh on her duties to patrol the guardians of Algacia, they witness the Light's judgment with their own eyes. Those who were found guilty and heretical were struck down by raining spears
Good music
of light,
again.
killing them instantly.
It's the login
Your search
server
brings
page
you
music.
to the temple where the three prophets of past, present, and future reside.
Good choices.
Beatrice, the Watcher of Trixion, was once one of them before she was chosen to ascend.
Oh my god, what is this?
Owned back for looking in places where he shouldn't have. Azakil also mentions how in the 500 years where Nineveh had left Algacia, the Round Table of Swords had been entirely taken over by Loriel. While accompanying Nineveh on her duties to patrol the guardians of Algacia, they witness the Light's judgment with their own eyes. Those who were found guilty and heretical were struck down by raining spears of light, killing them instantly. Your search brings you to the temple where the three prophets of past, present, and future reside. Beatrice, the Watcher of Trixion, was once one of them before she was chosen to ascend. It is at the loom of fate that they interpret messages from the gods. However, you soon learn the truth from them, which is that the prophets had stopped receiving messages from the gods many centuries ago.
What?
This truth proved that Loriel had fabricated every edict that was passed since then. You
That's
and Nineveh
crazy.
hurriedly return to Arianor to confront Loriel on his crimes. Loriel leads Nineveh down a hidden staircase.
L'Oreal.
beneath
Oh
the
my god,
sea,
that's
where an
crazy.
ancient PAL technology called the Cube was hidden
That's
away
crazy.
from prying eyes. Loriel confronts Nineveh, bidding her to join his cause. He plans to use the Cradle of Light, the last sanctuary created by the gods, to obliterate all life below in Arcacia as means to protect the Lazaneth. In order to destroy all of the demons and stop Kazaros, the mortal races below must be sacrificed. Nineveh vehemently refuses, forcing Loriel to eliminate her. You intervene to try to protect Nineveh, however both of you fall into the cube, entering its simulations. Through the cube, you are able to view different timelines that L'Oreal himself had experienced of the past and the future. You learn of the many timelines that lead to the destruction of the Lazanith at the hands of the demons, and going far enough back in time, you learn that L'Oreal discovered the truth after his meeting with Regulus 1,000 years ago. That Regulus, the omnipotent god of order, no matter how much time passes, no matter how much the Lazanith pray to him, will never forgive their sins and will never give them back their wings. They will remain trapped in the birdcage that Regulus put them in and will never again take to the skies. Meanwhile, L'Oreal had begun his march towards the Cradle of Light to put his plan into motion to obliterate all life below. He used forbidden spells to create artificial wings.
The
from
one I
light
watched
of
ended in
sacrificed
Iglesia. Yeah, I'm gonna
Lazarus,
watch that
which he
next.
would grant to
I'm
key
not even
members of his
playing.
cause. You and Nineveh managed to escape the cube and try to make up
This
lost
is
ground
fire.
to stop L'Oreal before he can achieve his goals. Meanwhile, Kadan comes to an agreement with former enemies Carmine and Armin to recruit their help against L'Oreal. You manage to defeat Tienis and Punya, confronting L'Oreal at the Cradle of Life itself. With the combined efforts of everyone, you are able to defeat L'Oreal, but at the cost of the entirety of Kayangel's cradle falling out from the sky, plummeting towards Arcacia. The impact of all of the debris would destroy countless lives. Even with everyone's best efforts to
Was
stop
that
the falling
L'Oreal,
rubble, they're unable to prevent the disaster
last
headed towards
boss of
Arcacia.
K-Angel?
But
Is
then,
that right?
a great power
Am I
L'Oreal
misunderstand?
pulled
Oh,
wings
you
from the
just
life
fucking
of
serious?
sacrificed
That's
Lazarus,
crazy.
which he would grant to key members of his cause. You and Nineveh managed to escape the cube and try to make up lost ground to stop L'Oreal before he can achieve his goals. Meanwhile, Kadan comes to an agreement with former enemies Carmine and Armin to recruit their help against L'Oreal. You manage to defeat Tienis and Punya, confronting L'Oreal at the
Oh my
Cradle of
god!
Light.
He's the
With the combined
K-Angel
efforts of
last
everyone,
boss!
you were able to
That's
defeat L'Oreal, but at the cost
crazy!
of the entirety of Kayangel's cradle
That's
falling
fucking
out from the sky,
crazy!
plummeting towards Arcacia. The impact of all of the debris would destroy countless lives.
Wow.
Even with everyone's best efforts to stop the falling rubble, they're unable to prevent the disaster headed towards Arcacia. But then, a great bird appears, the same that had guided you through the Temple of the Prophets, and reveals itself to be the avatar of the god of honor, Procyon. Despite having been punished in the past and losing his ability to speak, and despite the order from his creator to not intervene in mortal affairs, Procyon decides to save his people by turning back time and restoring Kayangel before it's destroyed. This was an act that directly defied Regulus and would not come without consequences.
That's kind of weird, yeah.
L'Oreal, who had peered before it speak and disciple
Maybe the
of
good must
prophets,
exist with
and
the
reveals
evil.
itself to be the avatar of the god of honor, Procyon. Despite having been punished in the past and losing his ability to speak, and despite the order from his creator to not intervene in mortal affairs, Procyon decides to save his people by turning back time and restoring Kayangel before it's destroyed. This was an act that directly defied Regulus and would
Why
not
did
come
he do
without
this?
consequences. L'Oreal, who had peered into the cube and witnessed over 600 million timelines, revealed that
Wow.
this exact order of events would be the only one that would save his race, and also prevent Carmine from leading Arcacia into chaos. In other words, the only timeline in which he
I like this.
must paint himself as the villain and force everyone to work together to take him down was the only one that led to a happy ending for those he cared most about.
That's amazing.
It was an act of self-sacrifice that would open the birdcage and free his people from Regulus's imprisonment. You then head to the place where Kadan had hid the Ark of Eternity, Kayangel, alongside Nineveh, Carmine, and Armin. There, the Ark is given to you, the Inheritor, and Carmine reveals the truth of the world. He reveals that there was no order anymore, that the very order that Regulus sought to create was now nothing but chaos, that despite the cries and pleas of those who pray to the God of order, that none reach him and that they fall on deaf ears. That Regulus had abandoned Arcacia and left in pursuit of not just becoming the god of order, but instead the god of all that exists. Beatrice then beckons the return of the Inheritor back to Trixion after obtaining the final fragment of the Ark. With all 7 pieces now housed in Trixion, Beatrice imparts knowledge to you for having come this far.
Is that the
Regulus
hyper awakening
split
skill?
The ark into fragments out of self-preservation. The ark was all-powerful, even exceeding his own power, and while it had the ability to create, in equal measure, it had the power to destroy. Because of that, not only was the ark split into fragments, but a key was necessary to unite them all. This was the lost ark, and the final component needed if they wished to use the ark to save the world. It was now up to you to find the missing key.
Okay.
But before you could continue your journey, it was finally time to confront Vergris and make a case for the preservation of the mortal races. Back when you encountered Vergris in North Vern when he diffused the magical core that Sigmund ignited, Beatrice speaks on your behalf
This guy has a good voice.
and describes the hardship and trials that you faced in order to reach this point. Vergris recognized this as a testament of the struggle and persistence of the mortals and decided that it was worth siding with them in the fight to save Arcacia. With the Lazineth now willing to join the allied forces
You
in
don't
the
know
ensuing
Saint?
war, it was time to return to the battle against
He's a streamer. No, I don't know him. What? That's
the
crazy.
Legion commanders.
What?
After returning to the surface, you learned that a Khan had appeared in Rethramis and was gathering sacrifices in order to summon the Red Moon in Arcacia. While you're able to defeat him, you aren't able to stop his mission, and Akan succeeds in laying down the foundation for the demons' advance. In the aftermath of the battle against the Lord of Decay, you are
Wait, I fib. Let me tell you what I know about him. I know that his computer. He used to be in the gaming industry, and now he's a full-time streamer. And that he's been streaming on Twitch for 10 years, and that he made this lore. And I know that I never heard his voice though before this. I never heard his voice. That's all I didn't know.
You are then summoned to Lutera Castle, where King Thyrene mentions the unusual disappearance of many Delane. While sleeping in the
Thanks, I'll turn
castle
it up.
at night,
Thanks for
you
letting me
have
know.
a vision of Armin,
Always let
guiding
me know,
you to where you can find
guys.
out more
Better
about
now?
what's happening. This vision brings you to the city of art and music, Plechia. This was also the homeland of Armin. Present in the city is also Sidereal Shandy,
Thank you.
his apprentice Zinnervale, Thyrane, and the priest Jederico, who was sent here on a secret mission to also investigate the case of missing Delane. You come across the old burned-down town where Armin once lived and are able to tap into some of his memories by resonating with some of the objects found in his home. With the help of Sidereal Shandy and the Yaz sage Zakra back in the city, you were able to piece together the sad origin story of Armin and the causes of much of his present-day trauma. Armin, as a baby, was once a treasure of the Twilight Priests, who knew he was the key to unlocking the Ark's power. A priestess of Sacria named Claudia smuggled him out of Sacria to protect him from the cruel fate of being sacrificed by the church. Branded a traitor and a heretic, the two led a life on the run, always trying to escape being captured. Armin, of mixed blood and a Delane, would become feared and ridiculed by those around him, shunned and labeled a demon. Claudia, who watched over and protected him, would face similar persecution as a witch raising a demon. One day, their home was discovered by the Twilight Priests, and Claudia tried to hide Armin, but would be beaten and murdered as punishment for disobeying the order. Before the
Oh
Twilight
my
Priests
God.
could recapture the
I don't wanna
broken Armin
relive
who bore
this.
witness to his dead mother, Archon Gustavan would arrive and sentence the Twilight Priests to death for their heinous crimes. Archon Gustavan, who was sorrowful that he was too late to save Claudia, instead would turn his efforts towards saving young
Comparing
Armin.
him to Harry Potter.
Armin had always wished to become a priest and do good in the world, and Gustavan made it his goal to fulfill the boy's ambitions. With
I
the
feel
truth
so
of
bad for
Armin in tow,
Armin.
the attention now turned to the case of the missing Delane. Jederico and Armin, who was also present in Plechia after having left
Definitely
Carmine's
the hardest
hideout,
part of the
followed
Lost
the
Ark
trail
story.
to the basement of the church at the top of Plechia. Bishop Antonio, who held a fake smile, had far more sinister intentions, as he was one of the main culprits behind the Delane disappearances. In the dark, blood-stenched basement of the church, they found many captive Delane, as well as a large amount of Silmail bloodstone, which were used for human experiments. Eventually, you were stopped by Bishop Antonio. You managed to defeat him even after he absorbed Silmail bloodstone into his own body, mutilating himself into a grotesque creature. Meanwhile, Armin meets with a mysterious member of the Twilight Priests, Vasilio. He strikes a deal with Armin and grants Armin a great deal of power in return. Turning to you, Armin gives his thanks for saving his fellow Delane before departing. You would meet Armin once more at Claudia's
Armin
grave,
Blonde,
but he
so
would
much
state that
better.
there are still
So much
things
better.
he must do that prevent him from joining your cause. Continuing the search for the Lost Ark brings you to the port of the advanced city of knowledge.
I thought I was looking for the
Volus.
key.
It is here that many of the priests who forsake religion in the pursuit of knowledge studied the golden path of the sage. For those who became a sage, they would gain access to the deepest parts of the knowledge repository, Umbella. It was in Umbella that the greatest secrets of the world were kept, but at risk, as many who traveled into Umbella found themselves lost within it. Before arriving at Voldus, however, you make a detour back at Shusshire, where you learn that the slumbering guardian, Rakathis, had awoken. Rakathis, once a guardian on the side of order, had been wounded heavily during the Chain War and was corrupted over time from the festering wounds left by Thamine. Back in Voldus, you meet an aspiring mage named Mario, who guides you
Love
around
that Mario.
Kalimdor, as well as instructs you on the basics of being a sage. The preparation was key, as the actual passing rate of the sage exam was very low, with many exams resulting in nobody passing at all. However, with much training and knowledge learned about the creation of a homunculus, both you and Mario succeed in the exam and are both admitted as sages to the tower. Marega, the head researcher of the sages, wishes to find a way to defeat the Chaos Guardians. Remember, these were the very creatures that had annihilated their former home in Sacria, and many of the sages devoted their lives in pursuing a means of combating them. His quest for knowledge led to disagreeable measures, and he would try to forcibly take your homunculus with the intent of dismantling it, since it was imbued with divine energy when you had created it. Zeharid, the current leader of the Sage Tower, witnesses your affection for your homunculus and realizes that you are different from the others who treat their creations as nothing but tools. After helping you save your homunculus, Zeharid offers to guide you to the Forbidden Library. Within the annals of the library would be the knowledge of the Lost Ark's location. It would be here in Umbella that the goddess of wisdom Skeptrum would speak directly to you, granting a vision of where the Lost Ark was. This vision showed Mount Antares of Curzon, the current resting place of Khazaros's body. Back on the outside, a new problem was brewing. The researchers of old in Voldus had captured an ancient guardian named Lazarum and held it captive for study. This would backfire on them, as Lazarum wasn't truly sealed. One of his powers was the ability to control guardians, which he used to force a corrupted and weakened Rakathis out of his slumber to attack the Sage's tower, breaking him out of his prison. Once released, Lazarum enacted his role as the gatekeeper and opened a massive portal that connected Arcacia to where Varkon's Chaos Guardian army was kept. This began an attack on the city of Voldus led by Varkon. However, as Varkon descended into Arcacia, he is goaded away from the conflict by Guardian Luen, who beckons him to meet with his former master Vergris. Lazarum, the cause of all of this chaos, is later defeated by the combined efforts of Marega and Zeharid. Marega sacrifices himself to give Zeharid enough power to defeat Lazarum, but she herself is destroyed in the process, and at this point, it becomes evident that Zeharid herself was a homunculus, created by the late leader of the sages, Adento. After the dust settled, the sages elected the senior sage Isaac as their new leader, and you managed to bring Zeharid back to life using her necklace that was left behind, which also happened to be her core. For your heroic efforts, the sages of Voldus vowed to support the allied forces in the battles ahead. In a separate scene, however, we see that Adento had guided Vasilio and the Twilight Priests to Umbella at some point for an unknown reason. After the events of Voldus, you are summoned back to Pletia, as the Holy Order has conducted an investigation on the murder of Bishop Antonio.
I made new
putting
rules!
You and Thyrane as
I have
the
to
key
rewatch
suspect.
all this now. Fuck! I'm like thinking, like, can I make it through part 2? Of course I can. Of course I can. This is my strength. Rules are rules. I made new chat rules. I'm gonna post them on my Twitter. They're much better now. They're much more pointed. I have to rewatch that whole part. I think the hardest part about it is that you have to keep your attention span on it. But it's so good with like the visuals and the voice and the music makes it really easy, but you have to like not miss anything. Yeah. It's crazy I have to say this stuff. Let's fucking go. Okay, let's really watch this.
It would continuing the search for the lost ark brings you to the port of the advanced city.
I
of
thought I was
knowledge,
looking for the
Voldis.
key.
It is here that many of the priests who forsake religion in the pursuit of knowledge studied the golden path of the sage. For those who became a sage, they would gain access to the deepest parts of the knowledge repository, Umbella. It was in Umbella that the greatest
I remember
secrets
this.
of the
Didn't
world
you
were
do the
kept,
library
at
quest
a
where you pick a
risk,
bookstore?
as
Maybe.
many who traveled into Umbella found
Could
themselves
also be a
lost
different
within
game.
it. Before arriving at Voldis, however, you make a detour back at Shushire, where you learn that the slumbering guardian, Rakathis, had awoken. Rakathis, once a guardian on the side of order, had been wounded heavily during the Chain
Isn't
War
that-
and was corrupted over time from the
Isn't that
festering
Behemoth?
wounds left by Famine. Back in Voldis, you meet an aspiring mage named Mario, who guides you around Kalinor, as well as instructs you on the basics of being a sage.
Kalinor?
The preparation was key, as the actual passing rate of the sage exam was very low, with many exams resulting in nobody passing at all. However, with much training and knowledge learned about the creation of a homunculus, both you and Mario
Yeah,
succeed
it
in the
is!
exam and are
Too
both
familiar, too
admitted as
familiar.
sages to the tower. Marega, the head researcher of the sages, wishes to find a way to defeat the Chaos Guardians. Remember, these were the very creatures that had annihilated their former home in Saphira,
Behemoth!
and many of the sages devoted their lives in pursuing a means of combating them. His quest for knowledge led to disagreeable measures, and he would try to forcibly take your homunculus with the intent of dismantling it, since it was imbued with divine energy when you had created it. Zahared, the current leader of the Sage Tower, witnesses your affection for your homunculus and realizes that you are different from the others who treat their creations as nothing but tools. After helping you save your homunculus, Zahared offers to guide you to the Forbidden Library. Within the annals of the library would be the knowledge of the Lost Ark's location. It would be here in Umbella that the goddess of wisdom Skeptrum would speak directly to you, granting a vision of where the Lost Ark was. This vision showed Mount Antares of Curzon, the current resting place of Kazaros' body. Back on the outside, a new problem was
Wait, where is
brewing.
that place
The
called again? Let me
researchers of
see.
Old
just
and
real
Voldis had
quick.
captured an ancient garden that the goddess of wisdom Skeptrum would speak directly to you, granting a vision of where the Lost Ark was. This vision showed Mount Antares of Curzon, the current resting place of Kazaros' body.
Okay.
Back on the outside, a new problem was brewing. The researchers of Old and Voldis had captured an ancient guardian named Lazarum and held it captive.
Okay, I was just wondering, like, I'm thinking, just talking to myself, but I wonder if they, like, we found all the parts of the Lost Ark and we put it back together, right? Because Beatrice put it back together and now we, like, hit it again, but this time it's a whole arc and we need a key? Maybe.
For study. This would backfire on them, as Lazarum wasn't truly sealed. One of his powers was the ability to control guardians, which he used to force a corrupted and weakened
Oh,
Rakathis out of
yes.
his slumber to attack
Baldur's
the
Gate 2.
Sage's tower, breaking him out of his prison.
Lovely.
Once released, Lazarum enacted his role as the gatekeeper and opened a massive portal that connected Arcadia
Lazarum.
to where Varkon's Chaos Guardian army was kept. This began an attack on the city of Voldis led by Varkan. However, as Varkan descended into Arcacia, he is goaded away from the conflict by Guardian Luen, who beckons him to meet with his former master Vergris. Lazarum, the cause of all of this chaos, is later defeated by the combined efforts of Marega and Zeherid.
I can see it now because it's all red and everything.
Gives Zeherid enough power to defeat Lazarum, but she herself is destroyed in the process, and at this point, it becomes evident that Zeherid herself was a homunculus, created by the late leader of the sages, Adento. After the dust settled, the sages selected the senior sage Isaac as their new leader, and you managed to bring Zeherid back to life using her necklace that was left behind, which also happened to be her core. For your heroic efforts, the sages of Voldis vowed to support the allied forces in the battles ahead. In a separate scene, however, we see that Adento had guided Visilio and the Twilight Priests to Umbella at some point for an unknown reason. After the events of Voldis, you are summoned back to Pletia, as the Holy Order has conducted an investigation on the murder of Bishop Antonio, putting you and Thyrane as the key suspects. With the trial underway, Jederico comes to your defense with damning evidence that absolves you and the King of Luterra of wrongdoing. But near the end of the trial, a ray of light erupts from the distant ocean, which everyone at the hearing immediately recognizes as the power of the Archon Gustavan, who had mysteriously vanished years ago. Zinnervale uncovers a clue that is deciphered by the sages in Voldis, which points you to the island Praetoria. Arriving in Praetoria, you find that Armin arrived at the island first. Praetoria is littered with agents of the Twilight Priests, as well as a great deal of Silmail bloodstone that have corrupted statues of gods such as Skeptrum and Aldebaran. Navigating the island, you and Armin are put through trials that force Armin to relive the trauma of his past. Eventually, your party makes it to Archon Gustavan, who is safely found and secured. With the Archon rescued, you once again are able to talk to Armin about what his aims are. Armin, who had struck a deal with Visilio, unlocked the truth about himself and his powers. He reveals that he himself houses the Lost Ark, as in he was the key all along to the fragments of the Ark.
What?
Realizing his
that's
purpose,
good.
Armin rejoins
That's
the
good.
hero and the allied
That's really
forces,
good.
finally. Armin explained that Kazaros' resurrection was imminent and certain. However, he had hoped that they could interrupt his revival, allowing them to land a decisive blow using the power of the Ark.
What does that mean?
When questioned as to why Visilio would help them, Armin wasn't able to give a clear answer, responding that Visilio's goal
Could
was
we
simply for
have
the power of
Armin
the Ark to be
and
activated
the Lost
once again.
Ark? Or could we only
After
have
saving
one?
Voldis from the attack of the Chaos Guardians, Famine, the Legion commander of Darkness, begins to make his move. With Akan having succeeded in setting up the Red Moon, they summoned it directly above East Luterra, which would serve as a battlefield where Thamine's army would strike. Thamine, who is momentarily halted by the combined forces of the Sidereals, summons his trump card, Dark Baratron, which hovered over Rethramus. It's unclear exactly what Dark Baratron is, but what is known is that it houses the Darkest Night,
Daddy
an
Thamine,
all-powerful
yes.
energy that defies
I'm
the laws
Thamine's
of order.
queen.
The battle against Thamine becomes the toughest ordeal that you and your allies must face yet. Darkest trump card, Dark Baratron, which hovered over
Hey,
Rethramus. It's
escaping.
unclear exactly what Dark Baratron is, but what is known is that it houses the Darkest Night, an all-powerful energy that defies the laws of order. The battle against Thamine becomes the toughest ordeal that you and your allies must face yet.
See ya.
Even with the mighty Kadan by your side. Thamine is slightly damaged with your combined efforts.
Thank you,
but
I
not
will.
close to defeated.
I
But
am,
then
I will.
Carmine, businesses of the Sidereals, summons his trump card, Dark Baratron, which hovered over Rethramus. It's unclear exactly what Dark Baratron is, but what is known is that
It's
it
just a
houses
field
the
force.
Darkest Night, an all-powerful energy
The
that
Dark
defies the laws of
The
order.
Darkest Night.
The battle against Thamine becomes the toughest ordeal that you and your allies must face yet. Even with the mighty Kadan by your side, Thamine is slightly damaged with your combined efforts, but not close to defeated. But then Carmine appears within Dark Baratron's domain and freezes Thamine long enough for you and the Sidereals to escape. Left by himself after the battle, confused and anguished, Thamine manages to recover some of his memories, now realizing that his original goal was to find Carmine. During the battle against Thamine's army, Carmine had met with Kukul Sedon, and the two share a conversation where Carmine brands Kukul a traitor, implying that Kukul was likely one of the primordial beings that existed from the beginning that sided with Kazaros in the coup that led to Zosma's death. When Zosma was defeated by Kazaros, two parts of him were able to escape unnoticed thanks to Kukul's efforts. One shard flew towards Blackrock Mountain, which would eventually become Carmine, the part of Zosma that was his ego or his mind. The other would fly to the rift where the abyss was located. This would become Thamine, who contained all of Zosma's strength and power. Thamine seeks Carmine, presumably.
I just wanted to clarify that earlier when I was talking about Kakul Satan lore, that was all the lore that was given. It's just that he's an evil clown. And I know I said blah blah blah, but there wasn't like more. It's not like I forgot or whatever. I actually remember stuff really well.
To rejoin to get Kazaros in the coup that led to Zosma's death. When Zosma was defeated by Kazaros, two parts of him were able to escape unnoticed thanks to Kukul's efforts. One shard flew towards Blackrock Mountain, which would eventually become Carmine, the part of Zosma that was his ego or his mind. The other would fly to the rift where the abyss was located. This would become Thamine, who contained all of Zosma's strength and power. Thamine seeks that existed from the beginning that sided with Kazaros in the coup that led to Zosma's death. When Zosma was defeated by Kazaros, two parts of him were able to escape unnoticed thanks to Kukul's efforts. One shard flew towards Blackrock Mountain, which would eventually become Carmine, the part of Zosma that was his ego or his mind. The other would fly to the rift where the abyss was located. This would become Thamine, who contained all of Zosma's strength and power.
Who's Zosma?
Thamine
I thought it was that girl.
Carmine, presumably to rejoin together to form the god of chaos once more. Carmine, on the other hand, has some hidden agenda which requires him to stay separate from Thamine, or he is worried that if they merge, he would be the half that is lost or consumed due to being weaker. With the time nigh and the red moon hanging over Luterra, the prophecy comes close to fulfilling. Belshazzar removes her horns, which once belonged to the Witch of Chaos, and regains her original powers over the element of ice. During the meeting between Varkon and Vergris, Vergris attempts to parley with Varkon, but Varkon shuts him down and refuses to return to the side of order. The crack between Arcacia and Petrania also begins to widen, which forces Vergris to ascend into space.
We have to go back at the end and find out who Zosma is.
This leaves him indisposed and unable to directly help with anything down below, leaving things to the Inheritor. After defeating all of Kazaros' Legion commanders and reuniting with Armin, who was also the key that they had been searching for all along, the Allied forces were ready to begin their march on Curzon and Mount Antares to foil Kazaros' resurrection. However, shielding Curzon from outside trespassers was a deadly pollutant that prevented any ship from safely landing ashore. The search for an answer on how to eliminate this deterrent brings the hero back to Arthatine, where research finds that light fused with divine power could destroy it. This would bring you in search of an ancient divine relic called Gienna's Tears, which once belonged to the underwater Posita tribe. This was a relic that they traded their fragment of the Ark for with Sacria 500 years prior that led to the Hollow War, which directly bled into the Chain War. It would prove to be a vital treasure that would save the lives of everyone throughout Arcacia as colossal waves of the pollutant were headed towards every direction. In order to find the sunken capital of the Posita, you enlist the help of the pirate lords of the sea, who had already charted a great deal of the ocean in search of Bloodclaw's treasure. Narkiel, the Red Calamity, refused to offer his assistance. Calvasis also had little way to help, but suggested speaking to Blackfang. Arriving at Blackfang's lair, you witness a mysterious Delane woman named Ren. She was one of the Asar Delane from South Curzon that had been knocked into the sea during the Chaos Guardian Behemoth's attack on their people. Ren sought a way to return to her allies and joins you in search of clues to enter Curzon. With the map of the ocean provided by Blackfang, the trail narrows to Lagoon Island, where you meet a member of the Posita tribe named Porsica, who tells you the tale of how their people incurred the wrath of the giants, causing their city to sink to the bottom of the sea. Looking at the map, Porsica is able to pinpoint the rough location of Nautilus, where Gienna's Tears can be found. This part of the sea, called Atusia, is a place where sirens frequent. Porsica gives you a conch called a Stardust, which can protect your ship from the raging storms and the sirens of the sea. You are then able to locate and enter Nautilus and eventually make your way to Gianna's Tears, where you encounter once again the Red Calamity Narkiel. Narkiel had been bewitched long ago by an incomprehensible beauty and was acting according to her wishes. It was none other than the former Covetous Legion commander Echidna, who had somehow survived the assassination plot that Vicus and Belshazzar had planned many centuries
It's like
prior.
a Sailor Moon scene.
Echidna had hidden herself away in the forgotten land of Gian, where she manipulated Narkiel and the Redfin pirates to do her bidding. To this end, she had Narkiel look for Gianna's Tears, which led them to a direct confrontation with you. Narkiel, however, is defeated, and Gianna's Tears are able to cleanse the ocean of the deadly miasma. This pollutant is pushed
That's what I was
back
wondering
towards
why
Curzon
Echidna
and
Gate 1
results
looks
in the
so
creation
different.
of large Silmail bloodstone walls surrounding South Curzon as the divine power of Gienna and
I love the
Cosmos'
bloodstone
chaotic
walls.
power
That's where I
clashing
always-
is what created the ore. Before
I love-
proceeding to South
I love the bloodstone walls. That's where I always stand, is where there's like these little bloodstone shards in the map.
Narkiel and the Redfin pirates to do her
In El Need.
bidding. To this end, she had Narkiel look for Gianna's Tears, which led them to a direct confrontation with you. Narkiel, however, is defeated, and Gianna's Tears are able to cleanse the ocean of the deadly miasma. This pollutant is pushed back towards Curzon and results in the creation of large Silmail bloodstone walls surrounding South Curzon, as the divine power of Gienna and Kazaros' chaotic power clashing is what created the ore. Before proceeding to South Curzon, however, you and Armin meet with Beatrice. She reveals to you that Kazaros' binds are weakening, and Lutera had chosen to seal rather than destroy Kazaros 500 years ago. He did this knowing that it would have to be the next inheritor that must defeat Kazaros, and he hatched a plan to alter the fate of Arcacia. Returning to the wall, Ren confidently states that she can create a gap large enough for one ship to pass through the wall. This allows your party to land ashore South Curzon and investigate what happened to the indigenous Delane that had lived there. The Delane of Curzon were split into two factions, the Asar and the Venus. The Venus were led by the ruthless Delane named Set, who would ultimately betray the Asar and ally herself and the rest of the Venus with Kazaros. In their effort to embrace chaos and seize power, they would capture and sacrifice their own brethren from the Asar to meet their goal. As the trio continues to search for survivors, they find more and more of Ren's former comrades having fallen to despair, including a despotic Cario, one of her oldest friends. Cario would eventually succumb to the frenzy of his demonic urges after consuming the cores of many Delane, as he felt there was no other path to victory against their enemies. In an act of mercy, you and Ren put down Cario before he loses any more of himself. In the face of hopelessness, the fallen Asar would find comfort in the soothing priestly powers of Armin, a Delane much like themselves. The efforts then shift towards rebuilding the Asar forces to take back the city of Elnaid from the Chaos Guardian Behemoth, the very same guardian that served beneath Varkon, and the first guardian to be slain which ushered in the events of Kazaros' first invasion 500 years ago. After defeating Behemoth and reclaiming Elnaid, Ren uses a powerful relic called the Flame Spear to completely destroy the Silmail Bloodstone Wall that blocked off South Curzon from the rest of the world. This action allowed the Allied forces to dock in South Curzon and rally in preparation of the assault on Mount Antares, with forces from every nation gathering for an all-out full frontal assault. Following the reclamation of the city, you hear reports of soldiers who went missing after smelling the scent of flowers in a land where no life should be able to grow. These were
I was just confusing why they had it blocked off.
soldiers that, much like Narkiel, fell to the allure
from
of
the
the
clash.
true Covetous Legion commander, Echidna. The trail is eventually followed to the Temple of Joy, where she lay in wait for you to arrive. Defeating her exposes a moment of vulnerability as she briefly recalls the betrayal of Vicus and her sword Rubicante. But Echidna gets up, composing herself before stating that you will cross paths again before leaving. Morph, the former servant of Vicus, also follows you to Curzon, vowing revenge for the death of his mistress. Belshazzar is also able to locate Echidna after she reveals herself, stating that Master Kazaros beckons for her to return. Despite the fact that the very demon that planned her assassination was now acting as a messenger, Echidna complied, showing no hostility towards Belshazzar. After dealing with Echidna, the allied forces rallied to take down Behemoth for the final time as well in Silac Cave, but the dragon had retreated into following its defeat in Elnead. With a small army, you and your allies fell the Great Guardian. However, after leaving, a Khan who had survived the previous encounter against you in Rethramis appears and absorbs the dragon's carcass to restore and empower himself. During this time, Belshazzar
Is this why
also
this is
privately
Act 1?
meets with Thaymine, though it's not known what they talk about. Now, with the allied forces assembled in Elnead, the time for the counterattack was approaching. The plan was to attack from multiple key strategic fronts, while a small detachment composed of you, Zinnervale, and Armin ascended Mount Antares itself. During the conference, while the allied forces plan to destroy Khazros, Armin interjects and tries to explain that it is vital they allow Khazros to resurrect, much to everyone else's confusion and objection. The assault on Mount Antares begins, and each faction of the allied forces does what they can to create a gap for your party to slip through Khazros' legion. Luen clashes head-to-head with Varkon while the reinforcements of Algacia keep Thaymine occupied. Your team scales Mount Antares and arrives at Khazros' seal, only to be blindsided by Belshazzar, who had lay in wait preparing for an ambush. Suddenly, your group finds themselves surrounded by demons, with Armin shackled to the ground and all 4 of the enemy army's commanders looming overhead. Armin saves you and Zinnervale by creating a portal and sending both of you through to the outside, but himself is captured in the process, causing the allied forces to lose the key. With their failure at Khazros' sealing chamber, the beginning of the end beckons. Mount Curzon's seal breaks, allowing Khazros' soul to return to his shackled body. The gargantuan Lord of the Abyss splits the volcano in half before beginning his attack on the allied forces, completely decimating anything and everything in his wake. Shandy attempts to stop him, but is helpless in the face of overwhelming power. Zinnervale, who had awakened his true powers, comes to the aid of his master and manages to hold off Khazros for a short time.
Love this
But
song.
then puts himself between a deadly attack and Shandy, sacrificing himself
login
to save his master.
server select page.
This would put Shandy into an uncontrollable, sorrowful rage, swearing destruction to all beings.
Yeah, I remember this.
You continue along the pathway until you encounter Kadan. However, the two of you are met with a confrontation against Thaymine, Varkon, and the resurrected Khazros, all at once.
Damn.
Kadan, with a plan in mind, opens a portal for you to go through and takes on the unstoppable trio on his own, with his fate left unknown. The portal transports you to an unknown land where you meet a mysterious hooded stranger who helps guide you through this foreign place.
I just did this
As
quest
you
like 2
descend
days ago
further
again.
into the land, the stranger reveals himself to be the late sidereal Lutera. He explains that you are in a place called the Abyss, a dimension born of both chaos and order, back when the universe had nearly collapsed in on itself 1,000 years ago, when Petrania had nearly collided with Arcacia. It became the resting place for fallen souls of both dimensions, and was also the birthplace of Khazros, whose true identity is the god of death. Khazros, an all-powerful being, controlled the flames of the abyss, and as long as the fires were burning, he was immortal and undying. Lutera realized that destroying Khazros
immortal.
500
I was
years
like,
ago,
what?
when
I thought you said he's
defeated him with the
immortal.
power
I'm
of
like,
the
what?
Ark, would not have achieved anything. He knew that the only option was to seal Khazros away and set the stage for the next inheritor of the Ark. With this in mind, Lutera bound Khazros' body to Arcacia and bought 500 years for the next inheritor to appear, and in his old age, he struck a deal with the gods to preserve his soul in the afterlife, so that he could wait for the next several centuries until his closest friend Kadan, the last of the Hal, could fulfill a promise to him to send the next inheritor to the Abyss. There, his soul would be able to...
Okay, I didn't know that Lutera was the disguised stranger, but that explains why he wrapped up his sword so nobody would know it's him.
...to guide the next inheritor to the flames that kept Khazros immortal and extinguish them once and for all, as only the living could put out the flames. Once Lutera had achieved his goal, his soul was finally able to rest and he sends you back to Arcacia, where you find that in your absence, the Allied forces had been utterly crushed and scattered by Khazros' onslaught. Reuniting with those that remain, the goal became clear. You must rally the forces of Arcacia back under one banner and take the fight to the now mortal god of death. The first step in the campaign to regain foothold in Curzon was dealing with the empowered Akan and the Titan Aegir, a self-proclaimed ruler of the Abyss that had emerged with Khazros and also served him. Aegir's defeat was the first of many important victories that would restore the will to fight to the Allied forces. The second would be the strategic placement of crystals all throughout Curzon that would erect a powerful barrier to stop the demons' attacks. One of the key locations that they needed to place a crystal, however, was in the Sennar Basin, which Belshazzar had been sighted in.
Hell
you would
yeah.
have to defeat another ruler of the Abyss,
Yes,
Zarok,
Act 2.
as well as
Everything
the
makes
empowered
sense now.
sorceress Belshazzar once again. Belshazzar would summon you to do battle against her in a place called Aperon, but you would end up defeating her and forcing her to retreat once again.
Still have the black
This
lipstick.
victory would gain an important foothold that would further the momentum of Arcacia's last hope. Before she leaves, however, Belshazzar would hark
I
that
actually
the
have
day
some.
of Diasfero was approaching. This would be the first time this name would be mentioned to you. There was still one other problem, however, and that was the missing sidereal Shandy and his apprentice Zinnervale. That to the Allied forces in the Inheritor, their fates were still unknown. One of the scout teams reaches out to you, relaying a message from Sidereal Way that the patrol team came across Zinnervale's scarf among the wreckage. Along with the Yaz sage Zakra, you follow the traces of illusion magic and come across a barrier that monsters are trying to get into. After defeating the monsters and lifting the barrier, Shandy's sword is found in an impacted crater where an illusion magic explosion had occurred. Zakra explains that this was a bad omen, as illusion magic shouldn't ever explode like that unless the person casting it has lost control. It was also discomforting that extinction had taken such a violent form, one with the intent of killing everything. Returning to the base in Elneid, Zakra explains that every Yaz has an inner domain called Dharana. Those who lose control over themselves can end up trapped within their own mental jail and eventually die. In order to rescue Shandy, they would need to use the Key of Khan, a relic of the Yaz. To that end, you, Zakra, and Wei travel to South Romeria to meet with the Yaz tribe. Upon arrival, they find that the port is under siege by creatures similar to the ones you saw in Curzon. Khazros' revival caused chaos gates to open that were remnants of a catastrophic disaster named Hainu that had nearly wiped out the Yaz many centuries back. Zakra explains that these creatures were not the same as the demons of Petrania. They were of a different origin, and the people of Romeria and Annika referred to them as yokai. Moving through the port, you meet Zakra's disciple and current elder, Rangea. She brings you to the training grounds where an elder candidate named Jin helps stave off more yokai from the Chaos Gates. Each of the 4 current elders were in charge of protecting different parts of Romeria. Rangea protected the port, Pahu protected the city, and Yuz protected the deeper parts of the mountainside. After defeating the yokai, the group makes their way south to the capital Shah, where they learn about some of the Yaz technology. Sometimes unfortunate souls fall into the abyss and hear voices that command them to seek death. The Yaz use an imprisonment device called a blue lantern to lock them into a subdimension jail called the Illusion Maze. The second elder, Pahu, is met, and his key, along with Rangea, attempt to open the Dharana of Shandy, but the gateway is immediately shut. Stopping by the church, they learn that centuries ago, Hainu
Almost
threatened
done.
to destroy the Yaz. However, the first 4 elders would sacrifice their lives to imprison Hainu underneath Lake Akasa behind the Gate of Nar. The second generation of elders would be Shandy, Zakra, Pahu, and Yuz. In order to figure out what was going on, the group tried to find items of close importance to Shandy to peer into his Dharana. They go to his house, a place where he locked himself in for many years after the events of the Chain War. Here you find a letterbox that had many exchanges between him and the other Sidereals. Lutera had also written to him and told him that he wishes he could live longer to see their plan through, but as a human, he would have to entrust the future to the other Sidereals who would live to see the day of Khazros' revival. Shandy's depression mainly stemmed from the events of the Chain War and how he had taken a great deal of the Yaws away from Remeria to join the war effort against Kazaros. Most of them would perish, including his first love. He would blame all of their deaths on himself for making that decision. Seeing that something was amiss, the group then discussed a plan to travel to the Illusion Maze, which also houses every Yaz's Dharana, to try to find Shandy's and manually enter it to rescue him. Along the way, the yokai attacks were increasingly frequent in the nearby gorge. Making their way through the Illusion Maze, the group encounters many fallen Yaz who had lost their minds and were wandering the jail seeking the release of death. Among them was a disciple named Rin, who was once a student of Yu's. Rin had fallen to madness in the past and destroyed a village, forcing her master to imprison her within the Illusion Maze. Wei fends off the rest of the fallen, allowing Yu and Rangea to proceed forward uninhibited. Rangea opens the way for Yu to enter Shandy's Dharana to try and reach out to him. Within his domain, there are many key moments. On the way, the group then discussed a plan to travel to the Illusion Maze, which also houses every Yaz's Dharana, to try to find Shandy's and manually enter it to rescue him. Along the way, the yokai attacks were increasingly frequent in the nearby gorge. Making their way through the Illusion Maze, the group encounters many fallen Yaz who had lost their minds and were wandering the jail seeking the release of death. Among them was a disciple named Rin, who was once a student of Yu's. Rin had fallen to madness in the past and destroyed a village, forcing her master to imprison her within the Illusion Maze. Wei fends off the rest of the fallen, allowing Yu and Rangea to proceed forward uninhibited. Rangea opens the way for Yu to enter Rin, who was once a student of Yu's. Rin had fallen to madness in the past and destroyed a village, forcing her master to imprison her within the Illusion Maze. Wei fends off the rest of the fallen, allowing Yu and Rangea to proceed forward uninhibited. Rangea opens the way for Yu to enter Shandy's Dharana to try and reach out to him. Within his domain, there are many key moments that impacted Shandy throughout his life. Here it's learned that the post-war trauma of all the Yaz warrior deaths haunted Shandy and was the main catalyst that would drive him into isolation. Later, he would leave Remeria to continue his role as a Sidereal of Shandy's Dharana to try and reach out to him. Within his domain, there are many key moments that impacted Shandy throughout his life. Here it's learned that the post-war trauma of all the Yaz warrior deaths haunted Shandy and was the main catalyst that would drive him into isolation. Later, he would leave Remeria to continue his role as a Sidereal to patrol and protect the world, eventually settling in Bamboo Island. One day, a baby would mysteriously appear on Bamboo Island, unattended. Initially, he would try to ignore it, but worried that the crying would attract demons, he decides to take the baby in. The baby would grow up to become his apprentice, Zinnervale. No! Zinnervale grew up with a dream to become a hero and be like Shandy. He vowed to one day grow strong and protect He would even go so far as to learn illusion magic despite being a human. Illusion magic was something that was only practiced by the Yaz, and it was considered impractical for any other race to try to learn it. Despite that, Zinnervale would succeed, earning the praise of Shandy for his innate talent. Shandy wrote to a friend asking for advice about the child, to which his friend wrote back that humans live very short lives compared to them, and so their childhood years end up molding the kind of person they end up becoming later in life. After reading this, Shandy felt obligated to continue caring for Zinnervale and raise him, but he would find that Zinnervale saved him by lifting him out of his depression after the events of the Chain War. Yaz don't celebrate birthdays because of their long lives, but humans do, and Shandy would try to find a good birthday present for Zinnervale. He would give him his first staff, which would ultimately set Zinnervale on the path to trying to succeed Shandy as the next Sidereal. Shandy was happy with this idea.
If he became a Sidereal, could he live forever?
And Cian in the past, both who would try to find their own successors. The other elders in Remeria sought to find successors of their own, but because of the blood on Shandy's hands after the Chain War, he would always refuse the many Yaz who wished to be his apprentice. In the end, it would be a human that would be his only disciple. Zinnervale would continue to train through the many years, becoming a talented fighter and inheriting extinction in his later years. One day, the light of the Inheritor would pierce the sky, beckoning all the Sidereals to ready themselves for Kazaros' impending revival. In the end, Zinnervale would sacrifice his own life to save the life of Shandy. This trauma is what sent Shandy down the dark path, blaming himself for leading Zinnervale to this timeline. He blamed himself for repeating the same mistakes that he made when he led all the Yaz and his first love to their deaths, and blamed his greed for a life of happiness for his son's death.
I could see that.
Shandy would eventually come to terms that he must move on, and that he had a greater duty to fulfill with Kazuros becoming an ever-looming threat. He sought to become a father and teacher that Zinnervale, even in death, could love and respect.
Damn!
The group escapes the illusion maze, but an earthquake changes their priority as a huge piece of debris falls out from a chaos gate towards the Gate of Nar. Before leaving out of view, the shadows in Shandy's Dharana twist and turn, morphing into the shape of a sinister clown. This could imply that he might have been manipulating Shandy's emotions up until that point, or he was simply observing since he was already in Remeria. The debris would crash into the gate that sealed the pitch-black night of Remeria, releasing Hainu into the world once more. It would take the efforts of the Inheritor along with the 4 elders to seal Hainu behind back the gate. Victory in tow, everyone returns to Shah, where Shandy overcomes his trauma and beckons his people to join the Allied forces once again in another war against Kazuros, despite the risk. Everyone agrees to join without any hesitation, and an army of Yaz, as well as the 4 elders, depart for Curzon. Zakra stays behind to protect Remeria from any yokai attacks in their absence. Before they depart, however, Shandy finds a hiding Kakul Sedon near his home, who reveals that Kazuros is building a fortress and a new body. When Shandy asks why Kakul is giving them valuable intel on the enemy, the clown responds he's doing it just for fun. But before leaving, he mentions that there are shadows that want Kazuros dead, and that you have to kill the demons, don't you? Alluding to the fact that Kakul was there, watching Zinnervale's death and Shandy's descent into madness. Escaping to a nearby cliffside, Kakul proclaims that all is going according to plan, and ominous figures stretch in his shadow behind him. Returning to Elniad, the Yaz rendezvous with the Allied forces, and news of Zinnervale's passing is brought with them. Nineveh asks you to speak with Guardian Luen, who requested your presence. Luen mentions that Varkan is beginning to maneuver again, and that there is something unusual going on with the black fog that spread throughout the lands when Kazuros was resurrected. Back at the Allied Forces conference, a new plan is enacted. Most of the Allied forces have recovered and reassembled, however there are still concerns about the yokai that call themselves Rulers of the Abyss. Defeating Aegir brought much needed morale to the army, and by eliminating Narok, they were able to erect a barrier to defend Elniad against enemy attacks. However, even as they were speaking, cracks were already forming in the barrier from constant invasion, and the shield could collapse at any moment. Shandy also shared his encounter with Kakul Sedon, making it clear that the clown demon had an ulterior motive and was clearly working against Kazuros, signaling that there was another party behind the scenes. He brought up how the fog's movements made it clear that after spreading, it was now coalescing back toward the seal room at Mount Antares, which likely is where Kazuros is constructing his fortress of obliteration. There, he would be building a new, far more powerful body. Shandy recounted how 500 years ago, when Kazuros descended upon the land, he was in the shadowy titan form that everyone had witnessed at Mount Antares just recently. However, when Kazuros took to the battlefield back during the Chain War, he had a completely different, far more imposing form, that of a knight wielding a colossal blade. The other sidereals confirmed this, which gave way to the idea that Kazuros was likely attempting to recreate this form. He also highlighted one very critical issue. The key to the Ark was still missing Armin. Despite their best search efforts, they failed to locate him. However, Shandy remembered that when you returned from the Abyss, that you had briefly resonated with Armin. It was likely a connection between you and the key as guided by destiny. A suggestion came up to try to use illusion magic to attempt to recreate the resonance in the same manner as what you had done in Plechia to relive Armin's childhood traumas. However, no one had anything that was a close possession of Armin that could be used as a catalyst. In Plechia, they had used the satchel that he had always carried with him. A sinister laughter erupted from the corner, and a rank-and-file soldier morphed into the conniving Carmine. Carmine offers parley, giving the allied forces Armin's treasured staff when he was a priest, Agapia. It was a well-known relic of Sacria that Archon Gustavin immediately recognized. With this, the elders of Remeria were able to use powerful magic to resonate Agapia with you, allowing a brief connection that would allow a shackled Armin to emit a powerful beam of light into the sky, revealing his exact location from afar in Mount Curzon. But before the allied forces could make their move, a scout appeared, reporting that a large-scale demon invasion was rapidly approaching Elnead, and among them was Thamine himself. Before a rescue attempt could be mounted to save Armin, you and your allies would have to face off against one of the greatest threats once again. Spearheading the demon army was the terrifying Thamine.
I like when he says, "This is where you blah blah blah." So like you're literally in the story, and he reminds you that you played the story. I like that.
Now accompanied by the shadowy Draken Furnace. Alone, either would be a great threat, but together they were a force to be reckoned with. However, the allied forces had a trump card that would level the playing field. The devilish Carmine, who had previously thwarted Thamine within his own domain, Dark Baratron, would once again put a stop to Thamine's advances. Carmine disarms Thamine and forces him to exit the battlefield with him to converse in private away from discerning ears. This would open the way for you and your allies to pierce deeper into the demon's invading army. With the help of Guardian Luen, the Arc Carrier Mystic, and the other Solar Guardians, you're able to repel the Chaos Guardians. This advance prompts the Chaos Dragon Varkin to appear, ambushing Guardian Luen with a devastating blast, a merciless act which kills him. Before Varkin could turn his malice towards you and your party, the progenitor Vergers arrives to put Varkin in his place. Vergers seals Varkin's power and cripples his wings, but before he could fully deal with him, Varkin is rescued by Kazaros, who teleports him far away. The pathway is then open to confront the mighty Mordoom, also known as the Punisher of the Abyss. Imbued with the power of lightning, Mordoom rains a torrent of devastating blows, with his gavel set to exact judgment unto you. With Sidereal Balthor and the leaders of Arthatine by your side, however, you're able to overcome Mordoom's trial. In his final moments, Mordoom mocks your victory, stating that in the end, Diasfero will change everything. Your return from the battle allows you and your allies to recuperate and plan forward towards the march on Khazros' Fortress of Obliteration. A meeting with Vergris reveals that despite the grave loss of Guardian Luen, his soul would someday reincarnate. However, it would take a long time due to how much power he had, long enough that he would no longer be an asset during
It's like very well done, like really well done.
the war. Vergris quickly moves on from his lament to inform you that the coalescing miasma was rapidly infecting Arcasia, and if left unchecked would be the end of the world as they knew it. There was no more time left, and you would have to confront Kazaros now or never.
I'm also gonna check his mic and copy whatever mic he has, cause yeah.
After meeting with Kadan, we also finally know what happened after you were pushed into the portal that led to the meeting with Lutera in the Abyss. Kadan managed to momentarily halt the advance of the combined forces of Thamine, Varkin, and Kazaros, however was unable to overcome all three of them together. Navanos, his sword, speaks to him, telling him to survive before teleporting him away from a deadly ray from Kazaros himself.
And it's the third time now the sword is like more powerful and also controlling and talking to the human. That's crazy.
By utilizing the power of the cube.
I love
Kazaros finds the outcome amusing, and now that nobody stood before him, began constructing his castle where he would keep Armin hostage and assemble his true body. His final words before the screen cuts to black: Diaspero. That concludes the current story of Lost Ark thus far. However, there are still many mysteries that remain unsolved.
Yeah.
Many questions that need answering. I'd like to just bring up some of these theories and questions as a thought piece for you, the listener,
Yes,
to
thought
ponder
piece,
about.
yes.
For example, Who is Shauna exactly?
Yeah,
And
who
what
is
are
she?
her
I never heard of
origins?
her.
Is she in any way related to Bloodclaw, the
She got
pirate
some
king who
Yuna
went missing
eyes.
ages ago? Is that
That's
why
why I
she
make all
always
my
smells
characters'
blood?
eyes.
Why are there two Lazenith with great wings when only the Watcher is supposed to have them? Why is it that Nineveh is also able to produce these wings?
What?
Is solved. Many questions that need answering. I'd like to just bring up some of these theories and questions
I
as a
had some
thought piece
questions
for
too.
you, the listener, to ponder about. For example, who is Shauna exactly, and what are her origins? Is she in any way related to Bloodclaw, the pirate king who went missing ages ago?
Look at the baby
Is that why she
pinata.
always smells blood? Why are there two Lazenith with great wings when only the Watcher is supposed to have them? Why is it that Nineveh is also able to produce these wings? What is the real identity of Belshazzar? It's clear that she does not have horns unless she's hiding them in a similar way that Vicus hid her horns before transforming. What are her plans? When reading the flavor text hovering over the horns that you get for defeating her in her Legion raid,
Isn't she kind of like a
reads,
mage?
O Queen of Phantoms, Seeker of the Abyss, you shall witness it all. You will lose all you possess, but gain one thing in return. Does Belshazzar have an ulterior motive, being subservient to Khazros, a greater aim? When reading the normal mode, smaller horns, it reads, when 3 hopes and 3 despairs end, and the land howls its red scream, and the sun shall rise. Do these hopes and despairs refer to the great wars of history, with the latest one in Curzon signaling the third and final one? Do any of the hallucinations that you see in the battle against Belshazzar inside the Nostalgia of Nightmares have any relevancy still? These were visions that she showed to you that may or may not be true in the time come to pass.
I like how he put the open-ended questions that we will never know the answers to until maybe they'll answer it at the end, because then it makes his whole entire YouTube video a thought piece now, so that's like legendary.
What exactly is Aperon? The tree and the building architecture in this dreamy landscape is reminiscent of the city of Rohendel and the world tree Elzawin. However, this is not the first time we've seen these buildings or this tree. Back when we confronted Belshazzar as she sought the fragment of Nostalgia, we saw these same buildings in the Sanctuary
I think
of
she's just like a
Darkness.
sorceress.
As we ascended into space to do battle against
Illusion
Belshazzar,
mage.
we also saw roots of a tremendous tree take root within the sanctuary. Is this tree, which we only saw for a fleeting moment back then, the same as the grand tree of Aperon? And what happened to Antares? For his cardinal sin of being deceived by his own creations, he was expelled from the domain of the gods by Regulus, stripped of his name and godhood, his fate unknown. The timing coincidentally was right before the events in Petrania that would lead to the demise of the god of chaos, leading one to question if Antares had sunken into the abyss and was reborn into the god of death. There are many supporting clues behind this theory. Firstly are the wings of Khazros. Khazros is seen in a few cutscenes, such as the one in one of the outcomes in the Cube of Algacia had 4 blackened wings that stretched across the sky. There are no other creatures in the history of the game that have 4 wings similar to that, besides for one. Found in the city center of Pletia is a statue dedicated to the old god Antares, a dragon which also had 4 wings of similar shape. In front of the statue is a singer who sings a song called Dreaming Fools, a possible allusion to the Howl. Next is the fact that the theory regarding Kadan being Antares has been debunked. In the Russian translation of his alternate card artwork, the Russian name and description claims him to be the last of the Howl instead of the localization used in any other language. In Algacia, there's a book that describes the appearance of the Howl as one of fair skin and white hair, which fits Kadan's appearance perfectly. And as far as the Howl go, are they truly extinct? The masters of dimensional travel, is it possible that they managed to escape Omnium and go into hiding to avoid the wrath of the gods? There is text that can be found on an island that states that like a phoenix, they will one day return from ashes, alluding to their connection to the god of fire. As we know, many details of the past are only written at face value and surface level. It is often said that history is written by the victors and can easily be manipulated to make one thing look another way. Going back to support the idea of Antares being Khazros, we could also look to the moment he converted Thamine into the Master of Darkness. In that scene when imparting the gift of primal darkness, he grants Thamine his form and appearance. It would not be far-fetched to believe that he made Feymine in the appearance or shape as his once creations, the Howl, back when he was still part of the pantheon of the gods. This also goes without saying that as the god of fire, it's only fitting that his corporal body was housed in Mount Antares, a mountain of flames. Another fascinating theory is the parallel between Petrania and Arcacia. One theory suggests that if the two worlds are opposite of one another, then it's possible that Petrania had its own Trixion, or its own edge of the world.
That's kind of cool.
To support this idea, one could look at Dark Baratron, which actually shares numerous features similar to Trixion itself in design and shape. This includes 7 pillars of light, similar to that which housed the arcs. It's plausible that Dark Baratron once was situated where
That's
the hole that leads
crazy!
to the abyss once
I have
was.
chills!
And by looking carefully
I don't
at the
like
hole that
this!
leads into the abyss in Petrania, there are features along the edge of the crater that match structures found in Trixion along the waterfall. And if Petrania had its own Trixion, is it possible that they had their own Watcher as well? Beatrice is the Watcher of Trixion and has prophetic powers, able to foresee the events of the future but not intervene with them directly. We know that the Witch of Chaos also had similar powers and ended up disappearing, her fate unknown and her horns fashioned into a crown for Belshazzar to wear and wield her powers with. Is it possible that the Witch of Chaos was once the Watcher of Petrania?
Whoa, okay,
In the battle
no.
against Belshazzar,
They
the
need to
Latin
stop
choir cites
now.
3 kings who will fight for the world: the Incomplete One, the Shadow, and the Forsaken One. While the identity of the first 2 are all but certain, the last one still remains a mystery. Who is the Forsaken One? Is it Kadan? Is it Kazaros? In an interview with Gold River, the author of the main components of the story and former director, he had mentioned that he had taken inspiration from other series and tried to have a similar naming structure for beings of great importance or power in the Lost Ark lore. He mentioned that those of great power all had names that began with the letter K, such as Carmine, Kadan, Kakul Sedon,
Okay.
Feymine, whose name is
Alright.
common in the Korean version of the game, and Kazaros. It would only make sense that Carmine is the incomplete one. Not only do we know that he is one half of a whole as the ego of Zosma, but Kakul Sedon
I have to
directly
find
calls him
out
this, as well
who
as
Zosma
Gloria during the
is.
collapse of the Cradle of Light. Carmine,
I
on
thought
the
it was
other
a
hand,
chick.
calls Kakul Sedon the Shadow, and we know after the events of Remeria that he is in league with a faction that calls themselves the Shadows. We have to question who the other Shadows are. Are they the other beings who existed from the beginning? Is this why we haven't seen any of the gods of darkness up until this point? Kadan's role in the story is also unusual. There are still many mysteries that surround him, with the only known fact that he is the last of his race, the mighty Howl that Regulus removed from the world a millennia prior. He was found by the Lazanith wandering the cube that was left behind underneath Arianor and raised in Algacia. He seems to be driven with an ambition to correct the sins of the past and protect Arcacia. Still, we saw there was an outcome in one of L'Oreal's simulations where Kadan never becomes a sidereal. In a concept art
He
shown
is,
by Gold
though.
River after one of the Loa-On presentations as well, the 6 original sidereals are standing in a plane, and he states that Kadan cannot be there to stand with them, raising more questions.
That's why he's also not in the
The
card
looping
packs.
theory of Lost Ark is one of the oldest theories that fans had conceived.
They just left
The
him
idea
out
is
of
that The
everything.
very core of the game's plot is that Regulus, the god of order, had created a predisposed destiny that would repeat itself every 500 years. Every 5 centuries, there would be a great conflict that would cause a great rift in the dimensions. Lutera may have recognized this as one of the few mortals that directly met Regulus face to face. It may be why he enacted his plan to have the next inheritor derail the destiny of the world and break Arcacia away from the shackles of a controlled fate. In Korea, Regulus's name is Lupion, which some have interpreted as a loop aeon, as in 1,000 years looping.
Wow.
Where will the story head next? It is clear that there is some level of finality. Some have interpreted derail the destiny of the world. Recognize this as one of the few mortals that directly met Regulus face to face. It may be why he enacted his plan to have the next inheritor derail the destiny of the world and break Arcacia away from the shackles of a controlled fate. In Korea, Regulus's name is Lupion, which some have interpreted as a loop aeon, as in 1,000 years looping. Where will the story head next? It is clear that there is some level of finality that will come with the final confrontation with Kazaros. as it's expected to have several major plot points revealed as the final battle of Chapter 1. Who is the next major antagonist? It's doubtful in Chapter 2 that we'll deal with Regulus yet. However, the Twilight Priests and Vasilio are still scheming, and Kakul Sedon's faction of shadows are also a major concern. Carmine and Thamine are two halves of the god of chaos, and so it's likely they will persevere until we have to deal with Regulus. And what of the other gods in the pantheon? It is taboo for them to intervene in mortal affairs, however many of them have defied this rule in Regulus's absence. Who among the gods will side with the mortals, and who will show their loyalty to Regulus? Do the corrupted statues in Praeteria, or the ones in the inner sanctum underneath Pletia, give us clues as to who are enemies and who are our friends? What was the key that Sidereal Lutera used to unlock the power of the Ark 500 years ago? What do Allegro, Kadan, and Armin mean when they say that the Ark is a symbol not of hope, but of sacrifice? If it's a symbol of sacrifice, who or what was sacrificed back during the Chain War? What is diaspero? It's not a real word, but sounds very similar to diaspora, a scattering of sorts. It's a monumental event that was only recently mentioned by Belshazzar, Mordoom, and Khazros himself. One idea is that diaspero is Khazros' New World Order, a reckoning where chaos is expunged in lieu of his idealistic way of governing the world and ultimately the Ark itself. Everything seems to be culminating towards this, and it's not unlikely that in the climax, in the final battle, that we learn its true meaning in the face of death itself. In the origin of beginnings was the Ark.
I need to know who Regulus is and who this
in the raw,
Zosma is.
Existence of this dimension stood Zosma, the god of chaos. Then would appear Regulus, the god of order.
Oh, there. Okay, it's answered in the beginning of the video. Beautiful. 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 That is the meaning of full circle.
The very universe.
That is the meaning of full circle. I was like, who's Zosma and who's Regulus? Right here.
In the origin of beginnings was the Ark, an all-powerful relic which transcended the planes of reality. In the raw, chaotic state of existence of this dimension stood Zosma, the god of chaos. Then would appear Regulus, the god of order.
Got it. GG.